The moment Willa Hart stepped off that train, she became the town's biggest joke. The man who'd sent for her, paid good money for a mail-order bride, took one look and told her to get back on, right there on the platform, in front of everyone. His words weren't quiet. They weren't kind. And they sure as hell weren't private. She stood there with her battered suitcase while an entire frontier town watched her dreams die in real time. But what happened next? Nobody saw that coming. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the February cold like a rusty knife, and Willa Hart felt every bit of that sound in her bones. She'd been on trains for 6 days straight, changing lines in Chicago, sleeping upright in Kansas City, eating stale bread she'd wrapped in newspaper back in Ohio. Her back hurt. Her feet were swollen inside boots that had seen better decades. And the small handheld mirrors she'd checked obsessively for the last 100 miles told her what she already knew. She looked exactly like what she was. Tired. 31. Desperate enough to answer an advertisement from a stranger. The platform at Ridgefield wasn't much to look at. Wood planks weathered gray, a few scattered benches, and a crowd that seemed too large for a town this size on a Thursday afternoon. Willa's stomach clenched. They were all here for the same reason, to see what Albert Pugh had ordered from back east. She stepped down carefully, gripping the handrail because her legs had gone stiff from sitting. The conductor handed her the suitcase without meeting her eyes. It was light enough that she didn't need help, which somehow made it worse. Everything she owned fit in one bag, and half of it was practical undergarments she'd sewn herself because pretty things cost money she'd never had. The cold hit her immediately, different from Ohio cold. Meaner, the kind that came off open plains and didn't care what you were wearing. Her coat was wool but thin, and she pulled it tighter even though it didn't help. That her? The voice came from somewhere in the crowd. Female, loud enough to carry. Willa didn't look. She scanned faces instead, searching for the one from the photograph. Albert Pugh. 38 years old, owned a dry goods store, looking for a respectable woman of good character to manage a household. The picture had shown a man with dark hair parted severely to one side, unsmiling but not unkind. She'd stared at that photograph for weeks, trying to imagine what kind of life they'd build together. There's Albert. Walking over now. She's older than I thought she'd be. The whispers weren't even subtle. Willa's hands tightened on the suitcase handle. She told herself it didn't matter what they thought. These people didn't know her. Didn't know she'd spent 12 years caring for an invalid mother who'd finally died last autumn. Didn't know she'd worked in a shirt factory where the foreman's hands wandered and the pay was barely enough to cover rent in a boarding house that smelled like boiled cabbage and someone else's misery. This was supposed to be different, a new start, a real home. Albert Pugh emerged from the crowd, and Willa's first thought was that the photograph had lied. Not about his appearance. He looked exactly the same, right down to that rigid part in his hair, but the picture hadn't captured the expression he wore now. The way his mouth drew into a tight line, the way his eyes moved over her like she was merchandise that had arrived damaged. Miss Hart. His voice was flat. No warmth. No welcome. Mr. Pugh. Willa forced herself to smile. Her lips felt stiff. It's a pleasure to finally... How old are you? The question landed like a slap. Willa blinked. I'm 31. I wrote that in my letters. You said early 30s. Albert's jaw worked. I assumed that meant 32 at most. Heat crawled up Willa's neck despite the cold. Around them, the crowd had gone quiet. She could feel every eye on her face, on her worn coat, on the suitcase that screamed poverty. I was honest about my age, Mr. Pugh, and everything else. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private. No need. Albert stepped back. Actually stepped back, putting distance between them like she carried something contagious. I've made a mistake. The arrangement won't work. For a moment, Willa couldn't process the words. They didn't make sense. She'd traveled 6 days, had sold everything she couldn't carry, had spent her last $18 on train fare because Albert had promised in 3 separate letters, that he'd reimburse her travel expenses once she arrived. I don't understand. The words came out small, childlike. She hated the sound of her own voice. We had an agreement. Through the agency. I have the papers. I paid for a wife, not a... Albert caught himself, but the damage was already done. His eyes flicked over her again with undisguised disappointment. You're not what I expected. Someone in the crowd laughed, just a short bark of sound, quickly stifled, but Willa heard it, felt it like a physical blow. Mr. Pugh, please. She was begging now and couldn't stop herself. I have nowhere else to go. You sent for me. You made promises. The agency made promises. I paid them, and clearly they misrepresented you. Albert's voice had gone cold, businesslike. I'm not obligated to honor an agreement based on false pretenses. False pretenses? Willa's shock was giving way to something hotter, something dangerous. I told you everything. My age, my circumstances, my... You failed to mention you were plain. The words hung in the frozen air. Nobody laughed this time. The silence was worse. Willa's face went numb. Not from cold, from humiliation so complete it felt like drowning. She'd known she wasn't pretty, had never pretended otherwise. But hearing it said out loud, in front of dozens of strangers, with that particular tone of disgust, there's a train back east tomorrow morning. Albert was already turning away. I suggest you be on it. With what money? The question came out sharp, angry. Willa didn't care anymore. You were supposed to reimburse my travel. That was part of the arrangement. Albert paused, didn't turn around. Take it up with the agency. The agency is in Chicago. I can't... Willa's voice cracked. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep control. I have $4 left, that's all. You brought me here, you made promises, and now you're just going to leave me stranded? I don't owe you anything. Albert's shoulders were rigid beneath his good wool coat. You misrepresented yourself, and now you're facing the consequences. That's nobody's fault but your own. He walked away. Just like that. Disappeared back into the crowd, which parted for him like water, then closed again. People stared at Willa with a mixture of pity and fascination, the way crowds stared at accidents. Something terrible to witness, but impossible to look away from. Willa stood alone on the platform with her pathetic suitcase and her 4 remaining dollars and the complete collapse of every hope she'd carried across 6 states. The train pulled away behind her. She didn't watch it go. From his workshop across the street, Seth Callan had seen the whole thing. He hadn't meant to watch, had been running late on a cabinet order and only stepped outside because the wood glue needed cold air to set properly. But the crowd at the station had caught his attention, and then he'd seen Albert Pugh approach the woman, and then... Seth's hands tightened on the cabinet frame. He knew that look. The one on the woman's face right now, as the crowd began to disperse, and she stood there like she couldn't quite figure out what to do with her body. He'd worn that same expression 3 years ago, standing in a different place but feeling exactly the same way, completely alone, publicly shattered, too stunned to even cry. Papa? Seth turned. His son Jack stood in the workshop doorway, all sharp angles and suspicious eyes at 10 years old. The boy had his mother's dark hair and his father's build, but his expression was entirely his own. Closed off, guarded, years older than it should be. What's happening at the station? Jack asked. Nothing that concerns us. Seth set the cabinet frame down carefully. Where's your sister? Inside, drawing. Jack's gaze drifted past Seth toward the platform. Is that lady going to stand there all day? Don't stare, Jack. Everyone else is. We're not everyone else. Seth wiped his hands on his work pants, buying time to think. The woman, Miss Hart, Albert had called her, had picked up her suitcase. She was walking now, but slowly, like someone who had nowhere to go but couldn't stand still any longer. Seth made a decision he probably shouldn't have. Stay here, he told Jack. I'll be back in a minute. Where are you going? Just stay here. Seth crossed the street before he could talk himself out of it. The woman had made it maybe 20 yards from the platform, moving in no particular direction. Up close, she looked worse than from a distance. Her face was blotchy from cold and something else. Her eyes had that glassy shine that meant tears were close but hadn't fallen yet. Miss Hart! She stopped, turned. Her hand went to her coat collar in an automatic gesture of modesty, even though there was nothing immodest about her appearance. Everything about her screamed respectability, just worn down, used up, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. I'm sorry, do I... She stopped, clearly trying to place his face. Seth Callan. I own the carpentry shop. He gestured vaguely behind him. I saw what happened. Her expression closed. Then you know I'm leaving town. Good day, Mr. Callan. Where are you going? The question stopped her. She blinked at him. I don't see how that's your business. It's not. Seth kept his voice level, calm. But there's not another train until tomorrow, and the hotel's owned by Albert's cousin. You won't get a room there. Color crept into her cheeks. I'll find somewhere. There's nowhere. Seth watched her process that, watched her fingers tighten on the suitcase handle. Mrs. Morrison runs a boarding house, but she's particular about her tenants. Won't take anyone who can't pay a week in advance. Then I'll sleep at the station. You'll freeze. That's my problem. You're right, it is. Seth paused. I'm offering a solution anyway. Willa stared at him. Her eyes were gray, he noticed. Light gray, like November sky. What kind of solution? I need help. Around the house. I've got 2 kids and no wife, and the place is falling apart. The words came easier than expected. Maybe because they were true. You need a place to stay and a way to earn money for train fare. Seems like we could help each other. You don't know me. No. I could be anyone. A thief. Are you? The question seemed to surprise her. No, but you don't know that. I know Albert Pugh's an ass. Seth saw her flinch at the language. I know he just humiliated you in front of half the town for no good reason, except you didn't match whatever impossible picture he had in his head. And I know what it's like to be stranded somewhere with no good options. Willa's eyes searched his face. Why would you help me? Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just desperate enough to accept help from a stranger. Seth shifted his weight. His knee ached from standing in the cold, an old injury that never quite healed right. Look, I'm not proposing marriage. I'm offering work, room and board in exchange for cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing. You stay until you've earned enough for a train ticket east, then you leave. Simple. Nothing's that simple. No, Seth agreed, but it's better than freezing at the station. Willa looked down at her suitcase, at her worn boots, at the platform behind her where people were still stealing glances. When she looked back at Seth, something in her expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, just resigned. How far is your house? 20-minute walk. And your children, they know about this offer? Not yet. Her mouth twitched. Might have been amusement. Hard to tell. That's going to go well? Probably not. Seth picked up her suitcase before she could protest. It really was light. Heartbreaking how light it was. But they'll adjust. Kids are tougher than people think. Willa fell into step beside him. She walked like someone used to covering distance, efficient and steady despite the ill-fitting boots. They made it 2 blocks before she spoke again. Mr. Callan. Seth. She ignored that. What happened to your wife? Most people danced around the question, asked if he was married, then got awkward when he said no. Seth appreciated the directness, even if the answer still felt like swallowing glass. Fever. 3 years ago. He kept walking. Happened fast. She was fine 1 week, gone the next. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. They walked in silence for another block. The town gave way to scattered houses, then open space. The cabin sat at the edge of everything, backed up against a stand of pine trees that looked black against the gray sky. It wasn't much. Single story, wood frame, porch that needed replacing. Seth saw it through Willa's eyes and felt a familiar shame. 3 years of barely keeping up with basic maintenance. 3 years of telling himself he'd fix things tomorrow, next week, when he had time. It's not fancy, he said. I wasn't expecting fancy. The front door opened before they reached it. Jack stood there, Mary clinging to his leg. His daughter was 6, tiny for her age, with blonde hair that needed brushing and a dress that needed letting down. She stared at Willa with huge blue eyes. Jack, Mary, this is Miss Hart. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Seth set the suitcase down. She'll be helping around the house. Why? Jack's tone was flat, hostile, because I asked her to. We don't need help. Jack, we're fine on our own. We don't need some stranger. That's enough. Seth's voice went hard. Miss Hart is a guest. You'll treat her with respect, understood? Jack's jaw worked. For a moment, Seth thought he might actually argue. Then the boy's gaze dropped. Yes, sir. Good. Show her where she can put her things. She'll take the spare room. That's Mama's sewing room. The words landed like stones. Seth felt Willa stiffen beside him. Mary's grip on Jack's leg tightened. It's a spare room now, Seth said quietly. And Miss Hart needs somewhere to sleep. So move the sewing basket and make space. Jack turned without another word, disappeared into the house. Mary lingered a moment longer, still staring at Willa with that unnerving intensity children specialized in. You got a little girl? Mary's voice was barely a whisper. Willa crouched down, bringing herself to eye level. No, sweetheart, I don't. You gonna leave like everybody else? The question hit harder than it should have. Seth saw Willa's throat work. When she answered, her voice was steady. I'm gonna stay as long as your papa needs help. How's that? Mary considered this, then nodded once and followed her brother inside. Seth and Willa stood alone on the porch. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Your son hates me, Willa said. He hates everyone right now. Don't take it personally. And your daughter thinks I'm going to abandon her. She thinks that about everyone. Seth opened the door. Welcome to the Callan household, Miss Hart. It's not much, but it's warm. The house was not warm. Oh, there was a fire in the stove, but warmth implied something beyond temperature. Comfort. Life. This place felt like a museum of a family that didn't exist anymore. Willa took it all in with a practiced eye as Jack led her through the main room. Dishes stacked in the sink, not dirty exactly, but not clean either. Dust on every surface. Mending piled in a basket that had clearly been sitting there for weeks. A children's primer left open on the table, abandoned mid-lesson. The spare room was worse. It was a sewing room, or had been. A dress form stood in the corner like a headless ghost. Fabric scraps littered the floor. The sewing basket Jack grabbed was overflowing with projects that would never be finished. You can sleep there, Jack pointed at a narrow bed pushed against the wall. Sheets are probably dusty. I'll manage. Willa set her suitcase down carefully. Thank you for showing me. Jack didn't move. He stood in the doorway, radiating hostility. Why'd you come here? Your father offered... That's not what I mean. The boy's voice was sharp, too sharp for 10. Why'd you come to Ridgefield? What were you running from? Willa met his eyes. I wasn't running from anything. I was trying to run towards something better. How'd that work out? Not well. Willa pulled off her coat, folded it over the bed frame. But I'm here now, so I'll make the best of it. You won't stay? Probably not. The honesty seemed to surprise him. His expression flickered, still hostile, but uncertain now. My pa, he doesn't think things through. He helps people because he thinks he's supposed to, not because he wants to. Jack's hands clenched. But we don't need help. We were doing fine before you showed up. Willa looked at the sewing basket, at the dust, at this angry, hurting boy who was trying so hard to convince himself of a lie. All right, she said quietly. All right, what? You don't want me here. I understand, but I made an agreement with your father, and I'm going to honor it, so we can spend however long I'm here fighting each other, or we can just exist in the same space without making it harder than it needs to be. Willa sat on the edge of the bed. Your choice, Jack. He stared at her. She could see him processing, trying to find the angle, the manipulation. Kids who'd been hurt learned to expect it. I'm going to tell you something, Jack said finally, and you'll think I'm being a brat, but I don't care. Go ahead. I don't want another mother. I already had one. She's dead. And I'm not going to pretend you're her or call you anything except Miss Hart or act like you being here changes anything, because it doesn't. Willa's chest ached. This boy. This fierce, broken boy. I'm not trying to be your mother, Jack. I couldn't be even if I wanted to. She was your mother and nobody can replace that. Willa kept her voice level, honest. I'm just someone who needs work and a place to sleep, that's all. I'm not asking for more than that. Jack's jaw worked. Then he nodded once, sharp and quick, and disappeared down the hallway. Willa sat alone in the dead woman's sewing room and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Dinner was a disaster. Willa had found flour and lard and a few shriveled potatoes in the pantry, Not much to work with, but she'd made do with less. She fried the potatoes, made biscuits from scratch, opened a jar of preserved beans that looked relatively fresh. Seth and the children ate in silence. Jack stared at his plate like it had personally offended him. Mary pushed beans around with her fork, but didn't actually eat anything. Seth looked exhausted in a way that went bone deep. "The biscuits are good," he said finally. "Thank you." More silence. Willa forced herself to eat even though her stomach was twisted in knots. This was going to be her life now. However long she stayed here, eating meals with people who didn't want her, sleeping in a dead woman's room, existing in the margins of a family's grief. "Miss Hart." Willa looked up. Mary was watching her with those unsettling blue eyes. "Yes, sweetheart? Why'd that man not want you?" "Mary," Seth started. "No, it's all right." Willa set her fork down. "That's a fair question. The truth is, I don't really know. He had an idea of what he wanted, and I wasn't it. Sometimes that's just how things work out." "That's mean." "Yes, it was." "Did it make you sad?" Willa considered lying, softening it, but Mary deserved honesty, even if the truth was ugly. "It made me feel awful, like I wasn't good enough." Willa met the little girl's eyes. But feeling that way doesn't make it true. Sometimes people are just cruel because they can be, not because we deserve it. Mary absorbed this. Then, "Papa says mean people are just scared inside." "Your papa sounds like a wise man." Seth made a noise that might have been disagreement. Jack's fork scraped against his plate, too loud in the quiet room. The rest of the meal passed without conversation. Afterward, Seth disappeared to his workshop. Jack retreated to the small room he shared with Mary. The little girl lingered, watching Willa clear the table. "You gonna wash those?" Mary asked. "That's the plan. Mama used to sing when she washed dishes." Willa's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Did she?" "Papa made her stop after she got sick, said it wore her out." Mary climbed onto a chair, feet dangling. "I don't remember the songs anymore." "That's all right. I don't know many songs anyway." They worked in silence. Willa washing, Mary watching. The girl's presence was oddly comforting, not demanding, just there. "You really gonna leave?" Mary asked eventually. "Eventually, when I've earned enough money." "Where will you go?" Willa rinsed a plate, set it in the rack. "I don't know yet. That sounds scary." "It is. A little." Mary kicked her feet, considering. "If you stay long enough, maybe it won't be scary anymore. Maybe you'll like it here." Willa's throat tightened. This girl. This sweet, hopeful girl. "Maybe," she said, because she couldn't bring herself to say no. That night, Willa lay in the narrow bed surrounded by someone else's unfinished projects and listened to the house settle. Footsteps in the hallway. Seth checking on the children. A door closing. Silence. She should have felt grateful. She had a roof over her head, food, a temporary solution to an impossible situation. Instead, she felt hollow. This morning she'd believed she was starting over, building something, becoming someone's wife, someone's family. The dream had been simple. A home, children, purpose. Basic things most people took for granted. Albert Pugh had taken that dream and crushed it on a train platform in front of strangers. And now she was here, in a dead woman's room, in a house full of ghosts, with a man who'd offered help out of obligation and children who didn't want her. Temporary, she reminded herself. This is temporary. But lying there in the dark, listening to the winter wind rattle the windows, Willa couldn't shake the feeling that nothing in her life had ever been permanent. Not family, not home, not safety. Why should this be any different? She pulled the thin blanket tighter and closed her eyes. Told herself tomorrow would be easier. She was getting good at lying to herself. It was the only way to survive. The first week passed in a blur of silent meals and careful avoidance. Willa learned the rhythm of the house quickly because she had to. Seth left before dawn most mornings, heading to his workshop before the children woke. Jack got himself and Mary ready for school with mechanical efficiency. No wasted movement, no conversation. They'd eat whatever Willa put in front of them, grab their slates, and leave without saying goodbye. She spent the days alone, and that suited her fine. The house needed work, not just cleaning, actual repair. Floorboards that creaked dangerously. A window in the kitchen that didn't close all the way, letting cold air seep through. The stove burned unevenly because nobody had cleaned the flue in what looked like years. Willa tackled it systematically. She'd spent enough time making do with broken things to know how to fix most of them. The window just needed the frame sanded down and the latch adjusted. She found tools in Seth's workshop. He had good tools, well-maintained, which told her something about the man. He took care of what mattered to him. The house just didn't make that list anymore. She was on her knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor when Seth came home early on the 4th day. His boots appeared in her peripheral vision, tracked with sawdust. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Willa sat back on her heels. Her hands were red from the lye soap. "Floor was filthy." "I meant the porch steps. I saw you out there this morning with the hammer. They were loose. Someone was going to fall through." Seth was quiet for a moment. "You know carpentry?" "I know how to use a hammer and nails. That's not carpentry, that's just common sense." Willa stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you want them done properly, you'll have to fix them yourself." "They look fine to me." "They'll hold. That's all I can promise." Seth nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but Jack and Mary burst through the door, bringing cold air and the last of the afternoon light with them. "Papa!" Mary dropped her slate and ran to Seth. He caught her easily, lifted her up despite the fact that she was getting too big for it. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck like she was afraid he might disappear. "How was school?" Seth asked. "Miss Peterson says I'm getting better at my letters." Mary's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I wrote my name 5 times without any mistakes." "That's good, sweetheart." Jack had stopped just inside the door. His eyes moved from Seth to Willa and back again. "What's she doing?" "Cleaning." Seth set Mary down carefully. "Same thing she's been doing all week." "Mama's floor was never that clean." The words came out sharp, accusatory. Seth's expression hardened. "Jack, it's true. Mama said a little dirt never hurt anybody. Your mama also said people should help when they can." Seth's voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. "Miss Hart is helping. You got a problem with that?" Jack's jaw worked. For a second, Willa thought he might actually push it. Then he grabbed his slate and headed for the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Mary flinched. Seth exhaled slowly. "I should go talk to him," he said to nobody in particular. "Maybe give him a minute." Willa dumped the dirty water outside, avoiding Seth's eyes. "He's got a right to be angry. Not at you. I'm convenient." Willa rinsed the bucket at the pump. The water came out freezing, made her hands ache. "Better me than you." Seth didn't argue. He just stood there, looking tired in that way she was getting used to. Not physically tired, though he was that too, sawdust still clinging to his shirt and arms, but tired in his bones. In his soul, if you believed in that sort of thing. "I'm making stew for dinner," Willa said when the silence stretched too long. "It'll be ready in an hour." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. That's the arrangement." She met his eyes. "I work. You provide room and board. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Callan. I'm earning my keep." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or just relief that she wasn't going to make this complicated. "Seth," he said. "What?" "You keep calling me Mr. Callan. It's Seth." Willa considered that. Considered the implications of first names and familiarity and the very thin line she was walking in this house. "All right," she said finally. "Seth." He nodded and headed for the bedroom to deal with his son. Willa went back to the stew, adding more water because it was too thick. The carrots were old, starting to go soft, but they'd be fine once they cooked down. She'd made meals from worse. Mary had stayed in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her slate. The girl was drawing something, not letters, just shapes. A house, a tree, stick figures that might have been people. "That's nice," Willa said. Mary didn't look up. "It's our family. Before." The before hung in the air like smoke. Willa stirred the stew and didn't ask questions. "You draw very well," she tried instead. "Mama taught me." Mary added another figure, smaller than the others. She said drawing was like capturing memories so you don't forget. "That's a good way to think about it." "Do you draw?" "No, I never had much talent for it." Mary considered this. What are you good at? The question was so earnest it almost hurt. Willa ladled stew into bowls, buying time to think. I'm good at mending things, she said finally, and making food stretch when there's not much of it, and fixing problems. Like the steps? Like the steps. Mary went back to her drawing, added a sun in the corner, even though the sky in the picture was clearly meant to be night. Children's logic. Everything needed a sun. Miss Hart? Yes? Are you sad all the time, like Papa? Willa's hand stilled on the ladle. She turned to look at Mary properly. The girl was watching her with those two old eyes. I don't know if your papa is sad all the time, Willa said carefully. He is. Jack says he isn't, but I can tell. Mary pressed too hard with her chalk and it snapped. She stared at the broken pieces. Everybody's sad here, even when they pretend they're not. Willa crossed to the table and sat down, picked up the broken chalk and fit the pieces back together. Sometimes people are sad for a long time after something bad happens, she said quietly. That doesn't mean they'll be sad forever. Just means they need time. How much time? I don't know, sweetheart. It's different for everybody. Mary absorbed this with the gravity of someone much older. Are you sad? Willa thought about lying, decided against it. Sometimes, but I'm working on it. How? By trying to be useful. By doing the next thing that needs doing. Willa handed the chalk back. That's all any of us can do, really. Just keep going. Mary nodded like this made perfect sense. Then she went back to her drawing, adding more figures, more trees, building a world where everything was simple and everyone had their place. Willa wished it worked that way. The second week, things got worse before they got better. It started with the laundry. Willa had found a wash tub in the shed and spent a cold Tuesday morning scrubbing clothes in water she had to haul from the pump. Her hands were chapped and bleeding by the time she finished, but the clothes were clean. Actually clean, not just rinsed and hoped for the best. She hung everything on the line strung between two posts in the yard. The wind kept trying to rip the sheets away, but she fought it, pinning each piece with fingers that had gone numb. That's when she heard the voices. 3 women stood at the edge of Seth's property. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. Willa recognized one of them from the train platform. The tall one with the severe bun and the expression like she'd been baptized in vinegar. Living in sin is what it is, the woman was saying. Loud enough to carry. That poor man, he doesn't know what he's brought into his home. Martha, you don't know that, one of the others started. Don't I? Strange woman shows up, gets rejected by Albert Pugh of all people, and within an hour she's moved into Seth Callan's house? Martha's voice dripped satisfaction. You tell me what that looks like. Willa kept hanging laundry. Didn't give them the satisfaction of turning around. She's probably desperate, the third woman said. Taking advantage of a widower with children. It's shameful. Someone should talk to Seth, make him see sense. You think he'll listen? Man's been half dead since Rebecca passed. He's not thinking clearly. Willa's hands tightened on a shirt. Seth's shirt. She could walk over there. Tell them exactly what the arrangement was. That she was working, not seducing. That their minds were filthy and their gossip was poison. But she didn't. Because arguing would just convince them they were right. Would turn her into exactly what they expected. Some desperate woman causing trouble. So she hung the last shirt, picked up the empty basket, and walked back to the house with her head up and her mouth shut. Inside, she let herself shake. She'd known this was coming. Small towns were all the same. People needed someone to talk about, and she'd given them the perfect story. The rejected mail-order bride shacking up with a widower and his children. Never mind the truth. The story was too good. That night at dinner, Seth was quieter than usual. He pushed food around his plate the way Mary did when she was upset. Something wrong? Willa asked. Seth glanced at the children. Jack was focused on his meal with aggressive intensity. Mary was building a fort out of her beans. Can I talk to you after dinner? Willa's stomach dropped. Of course. They waited until the children were in bed. Seth stood by the stove, not looking at her. Willa sat at the table and braced herself. I heard about what happened today, Seth said finally. Martha Peterson and her friends. At the property line. How? Mrs. Morrison's son was passing by. Told me when I stopped by the boarding house to fix her door. Seth's jaw was tight. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Willa relaxed slightly. He wasn't asking her to leave. That was something. It's fine. I've handled worse. It's not fine. Seth turned to face her. This town, they're going to talk about you being here, about what they think is happening. I know. It'll get worse before it gets better. I know that too. Willa met his eyes. If you want me to leave, no. The word came out fast, almost angry. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking if you're prepared for this. Because once the gossip really gets going, it's going to be ugly. Willa thought about the train platform, about Albert Pugh's face, about standing alone while an entire town watched her humiliation. I've survived ugly before, she said quietly. I can survive it again. Seth studied her. You're tougher than you look. I'd have to be. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Two people who'd both been ground down by circumstances and were still somehow standing. The house looks good, Seth said, changing the subject. I noticed you fixed the window latch, and the stove's drawing better. Flue was clogged. I cleaned it out. You didn't have to climb on the roof. Wasn't going to clean itself. Seth shook his head. Not disapproval, something else. Rebecca used to say that, about things not doing themselves. The name landed between them. Rebecca, his dead wife. The ghost that lived in every corner of this house. Willa didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. I should let you sleep, Seth said after a moment. Just wanted you to know about the talk, so you weren't blindsided. I appreciate that. He headed for the door, then paused. Willa? It was the first time he'd used her first name. It sounded strange in his voice. Yeah? Thank you for staying, for... He gestured vaguely at the clean kitchen, the mended chairs, the house that was slowly becoming livable again. For all of it. Then he was gone, leaving Willa alone with the dying fire and the weight of gratitude she didn't know how to carry. The third week, Jack's anger finally broke. It happened on a Saturday. Seth was at the workshop catching up on orders. Mary was napping. Willa was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Jack appeared in the doorway. Why are you still here? No preamble, just the question, sharp and accusing. Willa didn't stop working. Your father asked me to stay. That's not what I mean. Jack stepped closer. You should have enough money by now, for a train ticket. So why are you still here? I have enough for a ticket east, not enough for wherever I'd go once I got there. Willa punched the dough harder than necessary. I need more time. Liar. The word hit like a slap. Willa's hands stilled. Excuse me? You're lying. I see how you look at things. At the house. At... Jack's voice cracked. You're not leaving. You're trying to stay. Jack, you think you can just replace her? Just move in and take over and we'll all forget? His eyes were bright with tears he wouldn't let fall. She's dead. She's dead and you're here, and it's not fair. Willa set the dough aside, wiped her hands on her apron, forced herself to stay calm. You're right, she said quietly. Jack blinked. What? It's not fair. None of this is fair. Willa pulled out a chair, sat down. Your mother dying isn't fair. Me being here isn't fair. You being angry about it is completely fair. Don't do that. Don't act like you understand. I don't understand. I never lost someone the way you lost your mother. Willa's throat tightened. But I know what it's like to be angry, to want things to go back to the way they were and know they never will. Then leave. Jack's voice was raw. Just leave us alone. I can't. Why not? Because I made a deal with your father, and because... Willa stopped, started again. Because I have nowhere else to go, Jack. This isn't my first choice either, but it's what I've got. You're ruining everything. Everything was already ruined. I'm just here while it is. The words came out harsher than she meant them. Jack flinched like she'd hit him. Then Mary's voice cut through the tension. Jack, stop being mean. They both turned. The little girl stood in the hallway, her blonde hair mussed from sleep. She looked tiny in her nightgown, but her expression was fierce. Stay out of this, Mary. No! Mary marched into the kitchen and positioned herself between Willa and her brother. You're being mean to Miss Hart. She didn't do anything wrong. She doesn't belong here. Neither does being angry all the time. Mary's small hands clenched into fists. Mama wouldn't want you acting like this. She'd say you were being a... Don't you dare talk about Mama. Jack's face had gone red. You don't even remember her properly. I do too. You were 3 when she died, Mary. You don't remember anything real. Just stories Papa tells you. Mary's lip trembled. That's not true. Yes, it is. You're just a baby who... Jack Callan. Willa's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Both children froze. That's enough. You can't tell me. I can, and I am. Willa stood. You want to be angry at me? Fine. Be angry. Yell at me. Ignore me. Make my life here as difficult as you want. But you do not take your anger out on your sister. Ever. Jack stared at her. His chest was heaving. She's 6 years old, Willa continued, quieter now. She lost her mother too. And maybe she doesn't remember everything, but that doesn't make her pain less real than yours. You don't know anything about our pain. You're right, I don't. Willa crossed her arms. But I know cruelty when I see it, and what you just said to your sister, that was cruel. Jack's face crumpled. For a second, Willa thought he might cry. Then he turned and ran, out the kitchen, through the front door, into the cold afternoon. Mary burst into tears, real, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Willa knelt down and pulled the girl into her arms without thinking. Mary clung to her, soaking the front of Willa's dress with tears and snot, and all the grief a 6-year-old shouldn't have to carry. He's right, Mary hiccuped. I don't remember her. Not really. That's not your fault, sweetheart. I try so hard. I look at her picture and I try to remember her voice and her smell and I can't. Mary's fingers twisted in Willa's apron. Does that make me bad? No. Oh, sweetheart, no. Willa's chest ached. That makes you human. Memory doesn't work the way we want it to, especially when we're young. But Jack remembers. Jack was older. He had more time. Willa stroked Mary's hair. It needed washing, needed brushing, needed someone to care about it. That doesn't mean your love for your mama is less. You can love someone even if you don't remember everything about them. Mary cried harder. Willa just held her, rocking slightly, the way her own mother had done when Willa was small and the world felt too big. Eventually the sobs quieted. Mary's breathing evened out. She stayed pressed against Willa's chest, exhausted. Miss Hart? Are you going to leave because Jack's mean to you? Willa thought about lying, decided against it. I don't know, honey. Your father and I, we have an arrangement, but if Jack really doesn't want me here, if it's making things worse instead of better, it's not. Mary pulled back to look at Willa. Her face was blotchy, her eyes swollen. It's better with you here. The house is better. Papa's better. Even Jack's better, even though he won't admit it. I'm not sure that's true. It is. He's just scared. Scared of what? Mary's bottom lip trembled. That if he likes you, it means he's forgetting Mama. And if he forgets Mama, then she's really gone forever. The words hit Willa like a fist to the chest. This girl, this impossibly wise, heartbreaking girl. Your Mama's not gone as long as you and Jack remember her, Willa said softly. And me being here, that doesn't change that. I'm not trying to take her place, Mary. Nobody could. I know. Mary leaned against her again. But Jack doesn't. They sat like that until Willa heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps. Seth's voice calling for the children. In here, Willa called back. Seth appeared in the kitchen doorway and took in the scene. Mary in Willa's arms. Willa on the floor. The bread dough abandoned on the counter. What happened? Jack and I had words, Willa said. He ran off. Seth's expression darkened. What did he say? Nothing I couldn't handle. Willa? He's outside. Probably behind the shed. That's where he goes when he's upset. Mary had pulled away, wiping her face. You should talk to him. Seth looked like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded and headed back outside. Willa and Mary were left alone in the kitchen. The light had shifted, late afternoon now, shadows growing long. We should finish that bread, Willa said. Can I help? Of course. They worked together in silence. Mary's small hands weren't strong enough to knead properly, but Willa let her try anyway. Showed her how to fold the dough, press, turn, repeat. Simple movements, meditative. Miss Hart? When you do leave, will you say goodbye? Or will you just go like Mama did? Willa's hands stilled. She looked at this little girl who'd already lost so much. I'll say goodbye, she promised. I swear it. When I leave, you'll know. I won't just disappear. Mary nodded, satisfied. And Willa felt the weight of that promise settle over her like a stone. Because she'd meant it. When she left, not if when, she'd say goodbye properly. She owed them that much. Seth found Jack exactly where Mary said he'd be. Behind the shed, sitting in the dirt with his back against the wood, knees pulled up to his chest. The boy didn't look up when Seth approached. Want to tell me what happened? Seth lowered himself to the ground. His knee protested, but he ignored it. No. All right, I'll tell you what I think happened, and you stop me if I'm wrong. Seth leaned back. You picked a fight with Miss Hart, said some things you shouldn't have, probably told her she doesn't belong here. Jack's jaw tightened. Probably brought up your mama, compared them. Made Miss Hart feel about this tall. Seth held his fingers an inch apart. How am I doing? You don't know anything. I know you, son. I know when you're hurting, you lash out. And I know Miss Hart's an easy target because she's here and your mama's not. Jack's shoulders started to shake. I hate her. No, you don't. I do. I hate that she's here. I hate that she fixed the steps and cleaned the house and makes things better. The words came out choked. I hate that she makes me forget. Forget what? How bad it was. Before. Jack wiped his eyes angrily. When it was just us. When the house was dirty and nothing worked right and we were just surviving, Papa, and I got used to that. And now she's here making everything different, and I don't know how to. Seth pulled his son against his chest. Jack fought it for a second, then collapsed. Cried the way he hadn't let himself cry in years. I miss her, Jack sobbed. I miss Mama so much, and I don't want to forget her. You won't. I promise you won't. But if things get better, if we're happy again, doesn't that mean we're leaving her behind? Seth's throat closed. He held his son tighter. No, he said roughly. Being happy doesn't mean forgetting. It just means we're still living. Your mama, she'd want that for us. She'd want us to keep going. How do you know? Because she told me. Before she died. Seth's voice cracked. She made me promise that we'd keep living, that we'd let ourselves be happy again someday. Jack pulled back. His face was streaked with tears. Did you promise? I did. Are you keeping it? Seth thought about Willa, about the house that felt like a home again, about coming back from the workshop and smelling dinner cooking, about small changes that added up to something bigger. I'm trying, he said honestly. Jack nodded slowly, wiped his face with his sleeve. I should apologize to Miss Hart, he said quietly. Yes, you should. And to Mary. Definitely to Mary. They sat together as the sun dropped lower, father and son. Two people trying to figure out how to live in a world that kept changing whether they wanted it to or not. Papa? Jack's voice was small. What if I can't do it? Can't be happy again? Then we keep trying anyway. That's all we can do. Is that enough? Seth thought about the question, about survival versus living, about the difference between existing and actually being present in your own life. I don't know, son, but it's what we've got. They went back to the house together. Jack apologized to Mary first, a real apology, not just words. Then he found Willa in the kitchen. She was pulling bread from the oven. The smell filled the house. Miss Hart? She turned, saw his red eyes, didn't say anything. I'm sorry for what I said. About everything. Jack's hands clenched and unclenched. It wasn't fair. No, Willa agreed. It wasn't. I don't really hate you. I know. Jack's voice cracked. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. Willa set the bread down carefully. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out as we go. Jack nodded. Then, before he could stop himself, The bread smells good. It'll taste better with butter. Willa pulled out a chair. Sit. I'll cut you a piece. And just like that, something shifted. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed, but shifted. A hairline crack in the wall between them. It was a start. 1. The 4th week, the first snow came. Will awoke to find the world transformed. White covered everything, the yard, the shed, the pine trees that bordered the property, beautiful and unforgiving at the same time. She built up the fire and started breakfast. Oatmeal with a little honey she'd found in the back of the pantry. The children came out bundled in sweaters that needed mending. Snow day, Mary announced happily. We don't have school when it snows like this. Lucky you, Willa said. Seth appeared, already dressed for work. He looked at the window and frowned. I need to get to the workshop. Mrs. Chen's order is supposed to be done today. In this weather? It's not that bad yet. Willa looked at the snow, at the sky that promised more. You sure about that? I'll be fine. I've worked through worse. Seth pulled on his coat. There's enough firewood for today, but if this keeps up, someone will need to bring in more from the pile behind the shed. I can do that. It's heavy work. I've hauled heavier. Willa met his eyes. Go. Do what you need to do. We'll manage. Seth hesitated, then nodded and headed out into the white morning. The children spent the day playing inside. Mary drew pictures. Jack worked on arithmetic that Willa checked without being asked. The snow kept falling. By noon, Willa started to worry. By 2, she was checking the window every few minutes. By 3, when Seth still hadn't returned and the snow was coming down so thick she could barely see the shed, Willa made a decision. Jack, I need you to watch your sister. The boy looked up from his slate. Where are you going? To check on your father. In this weather, you'll get lost. I'll follow the road. I'll be fine. Willa pulled on her coat. It wasn't heavy enough for this kind of cold, but it was what she had. Keep the fire going. Don't open the door for anyone except me or your father. Understand? Miss Hart, understand? Jack nodded reluctantly. Willa stepped out into the storm and immediately regretted it. The cold was vicious. The wind drove snow into her face like needles. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her. But Seth was out there somewhere, and the thought of him collapsed in a snowdrift, freezing to death while she sat safe inside. No. She kept walking. The workshop was only 20 minutes away in good weather. In this, it took her nearly an hour. Her feet went numb. Her face burned from the cold. Twice she almost turned back. But then she saw it. The workshop, windows glowing with lamplight. Willa pushed through the door and nearly collapsed. Seth was at his workbench, planing a piece of wood. He looked up in shock. Willa? What the hell are you doing here? Making sure you weren't... She couldn't get the words out. Her teeth were chattering too hard. Seth crossed to her in 3 strides, pulled her toward the small stove in the corner. You walked here? In this? He sounded furious. You could have died. So could you. I know this route with my eyes closed. You... Seth stopped, looked at her properly, at her thin coat, her inadequate boots. You're freezing. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're turning blue. Seth started rubbing her hands between his. We need to warm you up slowly. Don't get too close to the stove. That'll make it worse. I know how frostbite works. Then why did you come? Because you should have been home hours ago. The words came out louder than she meant them. Seth stared at her. I was working. I told you I had an order. In a blizzard. You were working in a blizzard, while your children are at home wondering if you're dead in a ditch somewhere. Willa's voice shook. What were you thinking? I was thinking I need the money from this job. I was thinking... Seth stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I lost track of time. The storm got worse faster than I expected. So you were just going to stay here all night? If I had to, yes. Without telling anyone? Without... Willa's hands were starting to hurt as feeling returned to them. Your children need you, Seth. They've already lost one parent. They can't... I know that! The words exploded out of him. Don't you think I know that? I think about it every single day. Every decision I make, every risk I take, I'm thinking about them. Then why are you still here instead of home where you belong? Seth looked at her. Really looked at her. At this woman who'd walked through a blizzard to make sure he was safe. who was angry with him not out of spite, but out of something that looked a lot like caring. Because I'm trying to provide for them. Because jobs like this, they don't come along every day. Because, his voice dropped. Because sometimes work is easier than going home to that empty house. The admission hung between them. It's not empty anymore, Willa said quietly. Seth's expression shifted. No, I guess it's not. They stood close to the stove, not touching, but not far apart either. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, something unspoken settled into the space between them. We should wait it out, Seth said finally. The storm, it's too dangerous to walk back now. The children, Jack's smart. He'll keep Mary safe. Seth grabbed a blanket from the corner, shook the sawdust off it. We'll head back first thing in the morning, when we can actually see where we're going. Willa wanted to argue, wanted to insist they leave right now. But her body was exhausted, her hands were still numb, and Seth was right. Walking back in this weather would be suicide. All right, she said. They settled in for a long night. Seth kept the stove fed. Willa wrapped herself in the blanket and tried not to think about what the town would say if anyone found out she'd spent the night alone with Seth Callan in his workshop. But the funny thing was, she didn't really care. Let them talk. They were going to anyway. At least this time she'd have actually done something worth gossiping about. The workshop was colder than Willa expected once the sun went down completely. Seth kept feeding the stove, but the heat only reached so far in a space designed for work, not living. She pulled the blanket tighter and watched him move around in the lamplight, organizing tools that probably didn't need organizing. You don't have to stay up, she said. I'm fine. I'm not tired. You're a terrible liar. Seth paused, a plane in his hands. Then he set it down and rubbed his face. Can't sleep when I'm worried? About what? Jack. Whether he remembered to lock the door, whether Mary's scared without us there. He moved to the window, though there was nothing to see but darkness and snow. Whether the whole town's going to have something new to say come morning. Willa had been trying not to think about that last part. Probably will. You don't seem bothered. I stopped caring what people think somewhere around the third week of living in your house. She shifted on the hard bench. They were going to talk regardless. Might as well give them something real to chew on. Seth turned from the window. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Neither should you, but here we are. He crossed to the stove, poured coffee from a dented pot that had been sitting there since before Willa arrived. The coffee was probably terrible, but he handed her a cup anyway. It was terrible. She drank it. Can I ask you something? Seth said after a long silence. Depends on the question. Why'd you really answer that advertisement? The one from Albert Pugh? Willa stared into her coffee. Nobody had asked her that directly, not even Albert himself. Because I was 31 years old, living in a boarding house that smelled like death, working 12-hour days in a factory where the foreman thought my body came with the job. The words came out flat, factual. My mother had just died. I had no family left. No prospects. No future that looked any different from my past. She met his eyes. The advertisement promised a home, a family, purpose. So I answered it. And Pugh took one look and decided you weren't worth the trouble. He decided I wasn't pretty enough. There's a difference. Willa took another sip of the awful coffee. In his mind, he'd paid for something specific. I didn't match the order, so he sent me back. That's not how people work. That's exactly how some people work. Willa's voice was harder now. You think you're the only man who's ever been disappointed by reality? Albert Pugh wanted a young, beautiful wife who'd be grateful for the opportunity and never ask questions. Instead, he got me, older than he expected, plain as dirt, with enough life experience to know when I'm being used. Seth sat down on the bench across from her. You're not playing. Don't. I'm serious. Don't do that. Don't try to make me feel better with lies. Willa set her cup down harder than necessary. I've seen my face. I know what I am, and I've made my peace with it. The last thing I need is pity dressed up as flattery. It's not pity. Then what is it? Seth looked at her, really looked at her. Not the way Albert Pugh had looked, measuring, finding fault, but the way someone looked at something they were trying to understand. You're not playing, he said again, quieter. You're just not what men like Pew expect. You're real. You've got work-worn hands and lines around your eyes, and you don't hide any of it. That scares men like him. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's supposed to be the truth. Seth leaned back. Rebecca, my wife. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. And they were right. But you know what? By the end, when she was sick, she looked like hell, and I loved her just the same, because beauty was never the point. Then what was? Being able to count on someone, to trust them, to know they'd still be there when things got hard. His voice roughened. That's what mattered. The rest was just decoration. Willa didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in silence for a while. The wind rattled the windows. Snow piled higher against the walls. Eventually, Seth stretched out on one of the workbenches with his coat for a pillow. Willa stayed on her bench, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the stove's fire through the grate. Willa? Yeah? Thank you. For checking on me, for giving a damn whether I made it home or not. Someone has to. Yeah, I guess they do. He was asleep within minutes. Willa listened to his breathing even out and tried not to think about how good it felt to be thanked, to matter, even temporarily, to someone who wasn't paying her to care. She must have dozed eventually, because the next thing she knew, gray light was filtering through the windows and Seth was already up, banking the fire. Storm's past, he said when he saw her eyes open. We should head back before the next one hits. The walk home was easier than the night before, but not by much. The snow was knee-deep in places. Willa's boots, already worn through, let in moisture with every step. By the time they reached the house, her feet were numb again. Jack had the door open before they made it up the steps. Where were you? His face was pale. You said you'd be back. You said, I know. I'm sorry. Seth pulled his son into a quick embrace. The storm was too bad. We had to wait it out. All night? All night. Jack's eyes moved to Willa. She saw the calculation there. The understanding of what this meant, what people would say. People are going to talk, Jack said. Let them. Seth's voice was firm. We didn't do anything wrong. That won't matter. No, it won't. Seth headed inside, tracking snow. Where's your sister? Still sleeping. I kept the fire going like you said. Good boy. Willa followed them in, peeling off her wet coat. The house was warm. Mary appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Papa, Miss Hart! She ran to them, and Seth scooped her up. You were gone so long. I thought, we're fine, sweetheart. Just got stuck in the snow. Seth set her down gently. Why don't you help Miss Hart get breakfast started? I need to check the wood supply. He disappeared outside again. Willa and Mary stood in the kitchen, and the little girl looked up at her with those knowing eyes. Did you and Papa sleep in the same room? In the same building. Different parts of it. Oh, Mary considered this. People are still going to say things, aren't they? Probably. Does that bother you? Willa thought about lying, decided Mary deserved better. Yeah, it does. But not enough to make me regret checking on your father. Mary nodded like this made perfect sense. Then she asked, Are you going to marry Papa? The question landed like a bucket of cold water. What? No, why would you? Jack says that's what people do when they live together and spend the night places. Mary pulled out the flour tin. And I heard Mrs. Morrison telling her son that you were trying to trap Papa into marriage. Willa's hands clenched. Mrs. Morrison should mind her own business. So you're not trying to trap him? No, Mary, I'm not trying to trap anyone. Willa took the flour, measured it out with more force than necessary. Your father and I have an arrangement. I work. He gives me a place to stay. That's all. But do you want to marry him? That's not how this works. Why not? Because he's still in love with his dead wife. Because I'm just the hired help. Because I'm not the kind of woman men marry. I'm the kind they use when they need something and discard when they're done. But she couldn't say any of that to a 6-year-old. Because your father doesn't want to marry me, Willa said instead. And I don't want to marry him. So it's not an issue. Mary looked unconvinced, but didn't push it. They made breakfast in silence, eggs and the last of the bread Willa had baked before the storm. Seth came back in stamping snow from his boots. Wood's low. I'll need to chop more after breakfast. I can help, Jack offered. You can stack, I'll chop. They ate quickly. The atmosphere was tense in a way Willa couldn't quite name, like everyone was waiting for something bad to happen but didn't know what. The knock came just as they were finishing. Seth answered it. Martha Peterson stood on the porch with two other women Willa didn't recognize. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright hostile. "Seth, we need to talk." Martha's voice was sharp. "About what?" "May we come in?" "No." Seth didn't move from the doorway. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it from there." Martha's mouth thinned. "Fine. We're here on behalf of the community. There's been talk about your situation with Miss Hart." "What situation would that be?" "Don't play dumb. You have an unmarried woman living in your house, alone with you and your children. It's inappropriate." "She's working for me, helping around the house. And spending nights alone with you in your workshop, apparently." Martha's eyes glittered. "Mrs. Morrison's son saw her leave yesterday afternoon, saw you hadn't come home, and neither of you returned until this morning. We got caught in the storm." "How convenient." Seth's jaw tightened. "Say what you came to say, Martha. The community is concerned about the example you're setting for your children, about what Miss Hart's presence implies." Martha glanced past him to where Willa stood frozen in the kitchen. "We're asking you to send her away, for everyone's sake." "No." "Seth, be reasonable." "I said no." Seth's voice went hard. "Miss Hart has done nothing wrong. She works harder than anyone in this town. She's helped my family more in 5 weeks than any of you have in 3 years. So no, I'm not sending her away because you've decided to make her your latest source of entertainment." One of the other women spoke up. "It's not about entertainment. It's about decency. What you're doing, living with a woman who isn't your wife. I'm not living with her. She's an employee who sleeps under your roof, who cares for your children, who spent last night alone with you." The woman's voice rose. "If you had any respect for your late wife's memory, don't." The word came out like a gunshot. "Don't you dare talk about Rebecca. You didn't know her. You didn't care about her when she was alive. So don't stand on my porch and use her memory as a weapon." Martha stepped back. "We're trying to help you see reason. What you're trying to do is run off a woman who's done nothing to you except exist in a way you don't approve of." Seth's hands clenched. "Well, it's not your decision. It's mine. And Miss Hart stays as long as she wants to stay." "Then you're choosing to bring shame on your household." "I'm choosing to protect someone who needs protection, something you might try sometime." Martha's face flushed. "This isn't over, Seth Callan. The church board will hear about this, the school board, everyone who cares about the moral fabric of this community." "Let them hear. I've got nothing to hide." The women left in a rustle of skirts and righteous indignation. Seth closed the door and stood there, breathing hard. "Papa?" Mary's voice was small. Seth turned, saw his children staring at him, saw Willa standing in the kitchen with her face drained of color. "I'm sorry," Willa said quietly. "I should leave. I'm causing you trouble." "No." Seth crossed to her. "You're not leaving. They don't get to decide that. They're going to make your life hell. They can try." Seth's eyes were fierce. "I meant what I said. You've done nothing wrong, and I'm not throwing you out because a bunch of bored busybodies need something to talk about." "Seth, do you want to leave?" The question stopped her. Willa looked around the kitchen, at the clean floors she'd scrubbed, at the mended curtains, at Jack and Mary watching with anxious faces. "No," she said finally, "but what I want doesn't matter if it's hurting your family." "Let me worry about my family." Seth's voice gentled. "If you want to stay, stay. If you want to go, go. But don't leave because of them." Willa swallowed hard. "All right. All right, you're staying?" "All right, I'm staying, for now." Something passed between them. Understanding. Maybe the beginning of something else. But before Willa could examine it too closely, Mary spoke up. "Are they going to take us away? The church board?" Seth knelt down to his daughter's level. "No, sweetheart. Nobody's taking you anywhere." "But they said a lot of things, most of it nonsense." Seth pulled her close. "You and Jack are mine. Miss Hart is helping us. That's all anyone needs to know." Jack hadn't said anything. He stood by the table, his expression unreadable. "Jack?" Seth prompted. "You told them Miss Hart stays as long as she wants." Jack's voice was careful. Does that mean you want her to stay? Seth looked at Willa. She looked back. The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Yeah, Seth said finally. I do. Jack nodded slowly. Okay then. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it wasn't hostility either. Willa would take it. The rest of the day passed in tense quiet. Seth went out to chop wood. Willa cleaned obsessively, needing something to do with her hands. The children played some complicated game involving Mary's drawings and Jack's arithmetic slate. That evening, after the children were in bed, Seth found Willa in the kitchen. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle moving with quick, efficient movements. You don't have to do that, he said. The sleeve was coming off. I couldn't just leave it. Seth sat down across from her. About what happened this morning, you don't need to explain. Yeah, I do. He ran a hand through his hair. I shouldn't have spoken for you. Shouldn't have told them you were staying without asking you first. You were defending me. I was making decisions about your life without your input. That's different. Seth leaned forward. So I'm asking now, do you want to stay? Really? Willa set the mending down. I don't know. That's honest, at least. A month ago, I got off a train thinking I was starting a new life. Instead, I got humiliated and ended up here. She met his eyes. I don't know what I'm doing, Seth. I don't know if staying is smart or stupid. I don't know if I'm helping or making everything worse. You're helping. Trust me on that. Your neighbors don't think so. My neighbors are idiots. Seth's voice was firm. But they're loud idiots. And they're going to keep pushing. So if you stay, it's going to get uglier before it gets better. And if I go? Then they win. And you're back where you started, except with fewer options. Willa picked up the shirt again, started sewing. When you put it like that, staying sounds almost appealing. That's the spirit. They sat in companionable silence. Outside, wind whistled through the pines. Inside, the fire crackled. It felt peaceful, normal, like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Can I tell you something? Willa said without looking up. Go ahead. I like it here. This house, your kids, the work. I like it. She pulled the thread tight. I haven't liked much of anything in a long time. So whatever happens, whatever people say, I want you to know that this time here, it's been good, better than I expected. Seth was quiet for a long moment. Then, yeah, it has been. And that was all, just those few words. But they settled into Willa's chest like warmth, like something she could hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. She finished mending the shirt and went to bed. Lay in the darkness of the sewing room and thought about choices, about staying versus leaving, about what it meant to want something you probably shouldn't have. Because the truth was, she did want to stay, not just for the work or the roof over her head, but because somewhere in the last 5 weeks, this broken house with its grieving family had started to feel like the home she'd been searching for. And that was dangerous, because homes could be taken away. People could change their minds. And Willa Hart had learned the hard way not to count on anything lasting. But lying there in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her, she let herself hope anyway. Just a little, just enough to keep going. The gossip exploded over the next week like a wildfire in dry grass. Everywhere Willa went, which admittedly wasn't far, since she mostly stayed at the house, she could feel eyes on her. Whispers followed her to the general store, to the pump, to the small yard where she hung laundry. Jack came home from school with a black eye. What happened? Seth demanded, grabbing his son's chin to examine the damage. Tommy Byers said you and Miss Hart were living in sin. Jack pulled away. I told him to shut up. He didn't. So you hit him? He hit me first. Seth sighed. Jack, what was I supposed to do? Let him say that stuff? Jack's voice cracked. Everyone's saying it. About you and her. About what you're doing. I'm sick of hearing it. I know, but fighting doesn't fix it. Neither does ignoring it. Seth didn't have an answer for that. He sent Jack to wash up and stood in the kitchen looking defeated. I'll leave, Willa said quietly. This is my fault. I'll pack tonight. Stop. Seth's voice was sharp. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. And you're not leaving because my son got in a fight. He got in a fight defending me. He got in a fight because some kid couldn't keep his mouth shut about things that aren't his business. Seth moved to the window. If you leave now, you're telling Jack that running away is the answer, that other people's opinions matter more than doing what's right. Maybe they should matter. Maybe, do you think you've done something wrong? Seth turned to face her. Living here? Working for me? Have you done anything shameful? No, neither have I, so we're not acting like we have. His jaw set. You stay. We keep going, and eventually they'll get bored and find someone else to talk about. You sure about that? No, but it's all I've got. Willa wanted to argue, wanted to point out that his children were suffering, that his reputation was taking damage, that all of this could be avoided if she just left. But she didn't, because part of her, the selfish, desperate part, wanted to stay more than she wanted to do the right thing. So she stayed. And 3 days later, Albert Pugh rode back into town. Willa was at the general store when she saw him. She'd been buying flour and coffee, trying to ignore the way conversation stopped when she walked in. Then the door opened, and there he was. He looked exactly the same. Same severe part in his hair, same thin mouth, same expression like he'd smelled something rotten. Their eyes met across the store. Willa's stomach dropped. She turned away, focusing on counting out coins for her purchase. But she could feel him approaching, could feel the entire store watching. Miss Hart. She didn't want to turn around, wanted to grab her things and run, but pride kept her rooted. Mr. Pugh? Her voice came out level, calm. I heard you were still in town. I'm surprised. His tone was conversational, but there was an edge to it. I thought surely you'd have found your way back east by now. Plans changed. So I've heard. Albert's eyes were cold. Living with Seth Callan. Quite the arrangement. I work for him. It's employment, not whatever you're implying. I'm not implying anything, just noting the facts. Albert picked up a tin of tobacco, examined it with false interest. Though I do wonder what someone like Callan sees in the situation. A free housekeeper? Or something else? Willa's hands clenched. Be very careful what you say next. Or what? You'll have your employer defend you? Albert's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's already happened, from what I hear. Quite the scene, him throwing out the church ladies on your behalf. They had no right. They had every right to be concerned about moral standards in this community. Albert set the tin down. You know what I think, Miss Hart? I think you planned this. Got off that train knowing I'd reject you, knowing you'd need somewhere to go. And you targeted Callan because he's weak. A widower with children, desperate for help. Easy to manipulate. That's not... You saw an opportunity and you took it. Can't blame you, really. It's smart, in a ruthless sort of way. Albert leaned closer. But here's the thing. That contract we had, the one through the mail order agency, it's still valid. I paid good money for a bride, and legally, you rejected me. In front of witnesses, in public. Willa's voice shook with rage. You don't get to change your mind now. I never formally dissolved the contract. You told me to get back on the train. Emotional outburst. Not legally binding. Albert's smile widened. I've been consulting with a lawyer in the county seat. Turns out I have options. Either you honor the original agreement and marry me, or you pay back the money I spent bringing you here. All of it. Travel costs, agency fees, everything. Willa stared at him. I don't have that kind of money. I know. Which means you have a choice. Come with me willingly, or I'll take you to court and let them decide. He straightened his vest. Either way, your little arrangement with Callan ends today. You can't. I can, and I will. Albert headed for the door, then paused. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. After that, I'm filing papers. He left. The store erupted in whispers. Willa stood frozen, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. She'd escaped him once. She wouldn't. She left her purchases on the counter and ran. Seth was in his workshop when she burst through the door. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What happened? The words spilled out. Albert, the contract, the ultimatum. Seth's expression darkened with every sentence. He can't do that, Seth said when she finished. He seems to think he can. Then he's wrong. You don't owe him anything. He rejected you. But there was a contract, money exchanged. What if he's right? What if legally... Willa's voice broke. I can't marry him, Seth. I can't go back to that. I'd rather... You're not going anywhere. Seth's voice was hard. Certain. We'll fight this. Get our own lawyer if we have to. With what money? You're barely keeping up with orders as it is. I'll figure it out. How? Willa laughed, but it came out bitter. You can't. And even if you could, the whole town already thinks I'm some kind of schemer. This will just prove them right. Seth grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. Listen to me. You are not a schemer. You're not manipulative. You're a woman who needed help, and I needed help, and we helped each other. That's all. His grip tightened. And I'm not letting Albert Pugh or anyone else take you away because of some piece of paper. Then what do we do? Seth was quiet for a long moment. Then, we get married. Willa's heart stopped. What? If you're married to me, the contract with Pugh is void. He can't claim you. Seth's eyes were intense. It solves everything. You can't. Willa pulled away. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Seth followed her. It makes sense. You need protection from Pugh. I need help with the house and kids. We make it legal, make it official, problem solved. Marriage isn't a business transaction. Why not? That's what you were planning with Pugh, wasn't it? The words hit like a slap. Willa stared at him. That was different, she said quietly. How? Because I didn't... She stopped. Started again. Because you don't want to marry me. You're still in love with your wife, your dead wife, and I'm not going to be the poor substitute you settled for because you needed to solve a problem. Seth flinched. That's not what this is. Isn't it? No, it's... He ran a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm over Rebecca. I'm not. Maybe I never will be. But that doesn't mean I want to see you forced into marriage with a man who'll treat you like property. So instead I should marry you? A man who just admitted he's still in love with someone else? At least I'm honest about it. Honesty doesn't make it better. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both angry and scared and saying things they might regret later. I'm trying to help you, Seth said finally. I know, but I can't. I won't be your charity case. Won't be the woman you married out of pity. It's not pity. Then what is it? Seth looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. It's wanting you to stay, he said quietly. It's coming home and smelling dinner cooking and hearing you and Mary laugh in the kitchen. It's Jack actually smiling sometimes. It's the house feeling like a home again instead of a tomb. His voice roughened. It's selfish, probably, but I don't want you to leave. And if marrying you is what keeps you here, then that's what I'll do. Willa's chest ached. That's not enough. Not for marriage. Why not? Because you deserve more. Your children deserve more. They deserve someone who... Her voice broke. Someone who isn't just filling a space their mother left empty. Maybe we all deserve more. But this is what we've got. Seth stepped closer. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay forever. I'm asking you to marry me long enough to get Pugh off your back. After that, if you want to leave, you can leave. But at least you'll have choices. And what do you get out of it? Help. Company. Someone who gives a damn whether I make it home during a snowstorm. Seth's mouth twisted. That's worth a marriage certificate, don't you think? Willa wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him this was insane, that you couldn't build a marriage on convenience and desperation. But what other options did she have? Go back to Albert Pugh and a life of servitude? Run again with nowhere to go? End up in another boarding house, another factory, waiting for the next disaster? Or stay here, in this house that felt like home, with these children who needed her, with this man who was offering her safety in the only way he knew how? It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind, but it was real. Honest, and right now that was more than she'd ever had. All right, she heard herself say. Seth blinked. All right, I'll marry you, but on one condition. Name it. We tell the truth, to everyone, that it's an arrangement, not a love match, that we're doing this for practical reasons. Willa met his eyes. I won't lie about it. Won't pretend to feel something I don't. If people are going to talk, let them talk about the truth. Seth considered this, then nodded. Deal. They shook hands like business partners, and Willa tried not to think about how wrong it felt, sealing a marriage proposal with a handshake instead of a kiss. But she'd learned a long time ago that life wasn't fairy tales, and sometimes practical was the best you could hope for, even if it broke your heart a little. They told the children that night. Jack took it about as well as expected, which meant he didn't take it well at all. He stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, face hard. You're marrying her? Just like that? It's not just like that, Seth said. There are reasons. Yeah, because that man wants to take her to court. I heard. Jack's voice was sharp. So instead of fighting him properly, you're just going to marry her? That's your solution? It's the best solution we have. It's the easiest one. There's a difference. Jack looked at Willa with something close to betrayal. You said you weren't trying to replace Mama. You promised. I'm not, Willa started. Then what do you call this? A practical arrangement, Seth cut in. Miss Hart needs protection from Albert Pugh. I need help with the house and you kids. Marriage solves both problems. That's not what marriage is supposed to be. Maybe not. But it's what this one is. Seth's voice was firm. I need you to accept that. And if I don't, then you don't. But it's happening anyway. Seth softened slightly. Jack, I know this isn't what you want, but we're out of options. If Miss Hart leaves, where does she go? Back to Pugh? To nothing? Jack's jaw worked. He looked at Willa, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Anger versus logic, grief versus pragmatism. Fine, he said finally. Do what you want. You will anyway. He left, slammed the bedroom door hard enough to rattle the dishes. Mary had been quiet through the whole exchange. Now she looked between Seth and Willa with those two knowing eyes. Are you going to kiss? She asked. Willa blinked. What? At the wedding, married people kiss. Are you gonna? That's not... Willa looked at Seth helplessly. Probably, Seth said. It's traditional. But you said it's not a real marriage, just practical. Mary's forehead wrinkled. So why would you kiss? Because that's what people expect to see, Willa said carefully. So they believe it's real. But it's not. No, it's not. Mary absorbed this. That seems like lying. It's complicated. Grown-ups always say that when they're doing something they know is wrong. Mary picked at the hem of her nightgown. If you marry Papa, does that make you my new mama? The question landed like a stone in Willa's chest. No, sweetheart. Your mama is your mama. Always will be. Willa knelt down. I don't know what I'll be, but not your mama. That's not something anyone can replace. Then what do I call you? What you've been calling me, Miss Hart, or Willa if you want. Mary considered this seriously. I think I'll call you Mama Willa, so everyone knows you're different from Mama Rebecca. Willa's throat closed. You don't have to. I want to. Mary's voice was matter-of-fact. Is that okay? Willa looked at Seth. He nodded slightly. Yeah, Willa managed. That's okay. Mary hugged her quickly, a child's impulsive affection, then ran off to bed. Left Willa and Seth alone in the kitchen with the weight of what they'd just set in motion. Mama Willa, Seth said quietly. Don't. It's sweet. It's complicated. Willa stood, her knees protesting. Like everything else about this situation, you could still change your mind. If this is too much... No. The word came out sharper than intended. I said yes. I'm not backing out just because it's hard. Seth studied her. You sure? I haven't been sure about anything since I got off that train, but I'm here. And I'm staying. Willa met his eyes. Unless you're having second thoughts. No, He stopped, started again. I want you to know what you're getting into. This town, the people, they're going to make assumptions about us, about what kind of marriage this is. Let them assume. And when they figure out we're sleeping in separate rooms, when they realize it's not a real marriage, then we deal with it. Willa was surprised by her own certainty. But we do this my way, honest, no pretending to feel things we don't. You said that before, about telling the truth. And I meant it. I'm done lying to make other people comfortable. Something shifted in Seth's expression. Respect, maybe. All right, We do it your way. They went to bed separately that night. Willa in the sewing room, Seth in his room down the hall. It felt strange knowing that in a few days they'd be legally bound to each other, husband and wife on paper, strangers in practice. But she'd survived worse arrangements. She'd survived this too. The next morning, Seth went to the bank. Willa didn't go with him. Didn't want to see how much money he'd saved, how much he was willing to spend to get Albert Pugh off her back. But when he came home, his face was drawn. "How much?" she asked. "Doesn't matter." "Seth, I said it doesn't matter." He pulled off his coat with jerky movements. "I had enough. That's what counts." "Enough for what?" "To pay Pugh what he claims he's owed. For the contract, the travel, all of it." Seth's voice was flat. "I'm going to his store this afternoon, settling it before we get married." Willa's stomach dropped. "You can't. That's your money. For the ranch. For what? A dream I haven't touched in 3 years?" Seth shook his head. "The ranch can wait. This can't. You don't understand. That money was supposed to be your fresh start, your way forward after—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "After Rebecca. And this is my way forward now." Seth looked at her directly. "I'm not letting that bastard hold a contract over your head. I'm not giving him any legal standing to claim you, so I'm buying you out of it." "I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't ask for any of this. But here we are." He grabbed his hat. "I'll be back in a few hours. We'll go to the courthouse tomorrow, get the license. Reverend can marry us Friday if he's willing. And if he's not, then we'll find someone who will." Seth left before Willa could argue further. She stood in the kitchen feeling like she'd just stolen something valuable, something she had no right to. That money was supposed to be his future, his dream, and he just handed it over to buy off a man who'd rejected her on a train platform. The weight of it was crushing. Mary found her sitting at the table, head in her hands. "What's wrong, Mama Willa?" The name still felt strange, but also right in a way Willa didn't want to examine. "Nothing, sweetheart. I'm just thinking." "About marrying Papa?" "About what it costs, what he's giving up." Mary climbed onto her lap, something she'd started doing more often. "Papa says sometimes you gotta give up something to get something better." "Did he now?" Uh-huh. "When I didn't want to trade my good ribbon for Sally Martin's hair comb. But the comb was prettier, so I did it anyway." Mary leaned against Willa's chest. "Maybe Papa thinks you're prettier than money." Willa's laugh came out wet. "I'm definitely not prettier than money." "You are to us." The simple certainty in the girl's voice nearly broke her. Seth came back 2 hours later. His face was hard, but there was satisfaction in his eyes. "It's done," he said. "What did Pugh say?" "Not much. Took the money, counted it twice, gave me a receipt." Seth pulled the paper from his pocket. "Contract's dissolved. You're free of him." Willa took the receipt with shaking hands. It was real, official. Albert Pugh no longer had any claim on her. "How much did you give him?" Seth named a figure that made Willa's vision blur. It was everything, every dollar he'd saved, every cent meant for rebuilding his dream. "That's too much. Seth, it's worth it." "How can you say that? You don't even know if this marriage will work, if I'll stay, if—" "I know you're worth more than whatever plans I had for that money." Seth's voice was quiet, but absolute. "So yeah, it's worth it." Willa couldn't speak, couldn't process the idea that someone would sacrifice that much for her. A woman he'd known for barely 6 weeks, a woman he'd taken in out of obligation. "I'll pay you back," she managed. "No, you won't." "Seth, this isn't a loan, Willa. It's a choice. My choice." He moved to the stove, poured coffee that had been sitting too long. "Now we go forward, together, as husband and wife." "As business partners who happen to be married," Willa corrected. "If that's how you want to see it, that's how it is." Seth didn't argue, just drank his terrible coffee and looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. The courthouse was cold and bureaucratic. They stood in front of a clerk who looked bored, answered questions with single words, signed papers with hands that didn't quite shake. The clerk barely glanced at them. "License is good for 30 days. Find someone to perform the ceremony, bring back the signed certificate." "That's it?" Willa asked. "That's it." The clerk slid the paper across. "Next." They left with a marriage license that felt more like a business permit. Seth folded it carefully and tucked it in his coat. "Friday," he said. Reverend Williams agreed to do it. 2 o'clock. That fast? No point waiting. Gives Pew less time to cause trouble. They walked back through town in silence. People stared, whispered. By now, everyone knew about the upcoming marriage. Knew it was sudden, suspicious. Knew Albert Pew had been paid off and what that implied. Let them know, Willa thought. Let them talk. She was done caring. Thursday passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like bracing for disaster than celebrating. Willa had no dress except the one she'd arrived in, cleaned and mended but still worn. Mary insisted on picking flowers despite the cold. Came back with a handful of half-frozen wildflowers that wouldn't last the night. For your hair, the girl said. Brides need flowers. I'm not that kind of bride. You're still a bride, Mary was adamant, and brides need flowers. Mama said so. The mention of Rebecca hung in the air. Seth, who'd been working on something in the corner, looked up. She did say that, he confirmed quietly. At our wedding, she wore flowers in her hair. Said it was the only thing that mattered besides the vows. Willa took the flowers from Mary. They were scraggly and sad, but the gesture behind them was pure. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll wear them tomorrow. Mary beamed. Jack, who'd been silent for days, finally spoke. You really going through with this? Yes, Willa and Seth said simultaneously. Jack looked between them. And after? When Pew's not a problem anymore? What then? Then we keep living, Seth said. Same as we have been. Except you'll be married. On paper, that's all. That's not all. That's... Jack's voice cracked. That's permanent. That's you choosing her over... Don't. Seth's voice was sharp. Don't finish that sentence. I'm not choosing anyone over your mother. I'm choosing to help someone who needs it. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Seth's eyes were hard. And you'll understand that someday, when you're old enough to see that life isn't black and white, that sometimes you do things that don't make sense to anyone else but make perfect sense to you. Jack stared at his father. Then he grabbed his coat and left. Seth started to follow, but Willa stopped him. Let him go. He needs time. He's had time. Not enough. Maybe not ever. Willa sat down. You can't force him to accept this, Seth. He has to come to it on his own. And if he doesn't, then we live with it, same as everything else. Seth looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Just stood there in the middle of his kitchen, looking lost. That night, Willa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about tomorrow, about standing in front of a reverend and promising things she didn't feel, about wearing a dead woman's flowers in her hair while marrying a man who'd made it clear she was second choice at best, about what came after, because that was the real question, wasn't it? What happened when the immediate crisis was over? When Albert Pew was gone and the marriage was legal and they had to figure out what this arrangement actually meant? Would they stay married, separate, pretend it never happened? Willa didn't have answers. Just questions that kept her awake until the sky started to lighten. Friday arrived too fast and too slow. Willa put on her cleanest dress, the one she'd been saving for something important. It wasn't white, wasn't fancy, just serviceable brown wool that made her look exactly like what she was, a working woman past her prime. Mary insisted on doing her hair, and Willa let her. The girl's small fingers worked carefully, braiding and pinning with more skill than expected. When she was done, she tucked the wilted flowers into the braid. There. Now you look like a bride. Willa looked in the small mirror. She looked like herself, tired, plain, but the flowers added something, hope, maybe, or just color against the brown. Thank you, Mary. You're welcome, Mama Willa. Mary hugged her tight. I'm glad you're marrying Papa, even if it's just practical. Me too, sweetheart. The lie came easier than expected. The ceremony was small. Just Seth, Willa, the children, and Reverend Williams in the small church that smelled like old wood and dust. No guests, no celebration, just words spoken in a quiet room while winter light filtered through dirty windows. Dearly beloved, the Reverend started, and Willa stopped listening. She focused instead on Seth's hands, rough from work, scarred in places. Honest hands. When the Reverend asked for the rings, Seth pulled out 2 simple bands. Nothing fancy, just plain gold that probably cost more than he could afford. Where did you... Willa whispered. Had them made yesterday. Couldn't get married without rings. Seth's voice was low. People would talk. People are going to talk anyway. Yeah, but at least they can't say I did it halfway. The ring slid onto her finger. Too loose. She'd have to get it sized. But for now, it sat there like a brand. A claim. A promise made out of necessity instead of love. When it came time for Seth's ring, Willa's hands shook. She'd never put a ring on anyone's finger before. Never expected to. The band caught on his knuckle, and she had to twist it to get it past. Sorry, she muttered. It's fine, the Reverend droned on. Something about love and honor and cherishing. Words that didn't apply to this marriage. Willa felt like a fraud standing there, pretending to mean any of it. Then came the part she'd been dreading. You may kiss the bride. Willa's heart hammered. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned for it. She looked at Seth, panicked. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same panic she felt. We don't have to, he said quietly, so only she could hear. People expect it. Since when do you care what people expect? Fair point. But the Reverend was watching. Mary was watching. Even Jack, who'd shown up at the last minute, was watching from the back pew. Just make it quick, Willa whispered. Seth's mouth twitched. Might have been amusement. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Maybe less. Nothing romantic about it. Just a brief contact, obligation fulfilled. But Willa felt it everywhere. She pulled back fast, face burning. Seth looked equally rattled. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend said, oblivious to the tension. And just like that, it was done. Willa Hart was now Willa Callan, married to a man she barely knew, stepmother to children who didn't want her, tied to a life she'd never planned for. They signed the certificate. The Reverend witnessed it, made it official in the eyes of the law, if not the eyes of anyone else. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. Willa pulled her coat tighter and started walking. Seth fell into step beside her. The children trailed behind. Well, Seth said after a block. That's done. Yeah. You all right? Fine. She wasn't, but what else could she say? They walked the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the house, Mary ran ahead. Jack followed more slowly. Seth and Willa stood in the yard, neither quite ready to go inside and face what came next. I'll sleep in the workshop tonight, Seth said. Give you space. You don't have to do that. Yeah, I do. This is supposed to be your wedding night. Least I can do is not make it more awkward than it already is. Willa almost laughed. This whole thing is awkward. True, but we survived it. Seth looked at the ring on his finger like he was seeing it for the first time. And we'll survive whatever comes next. You sound pretty sure about that. I'm not, but I'm good at pretending. He headed for the workshop. I'll be back in the morning. Make sure the kids eat something. Then he was gone, leaving Willa alone on her wedding day. She went inside where Mary was drawing pictures of the ceremony and Jack was studiously ignoring everyone. Are you married now? Mary asked. For real? For real. Then why's Papa sleeping in the workshop? Willa didn't have a good answer for that, so she deflected. He has work to finish. You know how he is. Mary didn't look convinced, but she let it go. That night, Willa lay in the sewing room. Her room now, apparently, even though she was supposed to be someone's wife, and stared at the ring on her finger. It caught the moonlight, throwing small reflections on the wall. She was married. Actually, legally married. To a man who'd made it clear this was temporary, practical. A solution to a problem. But somewhere in the middle of all that practicality, Willa had started wanting something else. Something more. Something that looked less like a business arrangement and more like the marriage she'd dreamed about when she'd answered Albert Pugh's advertisement. And that was dangerous. Because wanting things you couldn't have was how you got hurt. So she took off the ring, set it on the small table beside the bed, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she'd put it back on. Play the part. Be Seth Callan's wife in name, if nothing else. But tonight, she let herself grieve the wedding she'd never have, the love she'd never feel, the life she'd never live. And in the workshop, Seth sat on a workbench and stared at his own ring. Thought about Rebecca, about the wedding they'd had 15 years ago, about promises made in good faith and broken by fate, about the woman sleeping in his house who'd agreed to marry him for all the wrong reasons, about whether he'd made a terrible mistake or the only choice that made sense. He didn't have answers, just questions and a gold band that felt foreign on his finger. But he'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it. They both did. The town erupted the next day. News of the marriage spread faster than fire through dry brush. By noon, everyone in Ridgefield knew, and everyone had opinions. Willa went to the general store for supplies and walked into a wall of silence. Conversation stopped. Women clutched their baskets and stared. The clerk, who'd been friendly enough before, barely acknowledged her. Mrs. Callan. His voice was cold, formal. The name felt wrong. Just Willa's fine. It's Mrs. Callan now. You're a married woman. He said it like an accusation. Willa bought flour and coffee without conversation, left with her head high and her stomach churning. At home, she found a note shoved under the door. Unsigned. The handwriting cramped and angry. Shameless. That's what you are. Trapping a good man with your schemes. Rebecca Callan must be turning in her grave. Willa crumpled it without finishing, threw it in the stove. There were 2 more notes over the next few days. Then someone threw a rock through the kitchen window. Then the school told Seth that perhaps it would be better if Jack stayed home for a while, given the disruption his presence was causing. Disruption, Seth repeated, standing in the principal's office. My son defends his family and you call it disruption? He's been in 3 fights this week, Mr. Callan. We can't have that kind of violence. And what about the violence of other kids calling his stepmother a whore? You going to address that? The principal's face reddened. People are concerned about the example you're setting. The example I'm setting is standing by the people I've committed to. If that's a problem, then this town has bigger issues than my marriage. Seth pulled Jack from school that day. Told him he'd be learning at home for a while. The boy didn't argue. That night, after the children were in bed, Seth found Willa scrubbing the kitchen floor. She'd been cleaning obsessively lately, like if she just worked hard enough, people would see she was more than what they thought. You don't have to do that. Floor's clean enough. It's never clean enough. Willa didn't stop scrubbing. There's always another stain, another mark, another thing that needs fixing. Seth heard what she wasn't saying. We could leave, start over somewhere else. Willa's hands stilled. Where would we go? I don't know. Somewhere people don't know us. Somewhere you're not the rejected mail-order bride and I'm not the widower who married in haste. And do what? You have a business here, a home. You can't just walk away from that. I can if staying means my family suffers. Your family suffered before I got here. At least now they have clean floors. Willa sat back on her heels. Running doesn't solve anything, Seth. Trust me. I've tried. Then what do? We keep going. We prove them wrong by not breaking. Willa looked at him. That's all we can do. Seth wanted to argue, wanted to fix this. But he didn't know how to fix other people's hatred, didn't know how to make them see Willa as he saw her, strong, capable, worthy of respect. So he did the only thing he could. He went to the bank the next morning and withdrew money he didn't have. Went to the hardware store and bought glass for the broken window. Came home and installed it himself while Willa watched from inside. When he finished, she brought him coffee. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. It's my house. My window. My responsibility. Our house now. Remember? We're married. The word still felt strange, but less strange than it had a week ago. Yeah, Seth said. We are. They stood together in the cold afternoon, drinking terrible coffee and looking at the new window that would probably just get broken again. But at least for now, it was fixed. And maybe that was enough. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the wedding. Willa was walking back from the pump, water buckets heavy in each hand, when she saw Albert Pugh standing in the middle of the street. He wasn't alone. Martha Peterson was with him, along with 2 men Willa recognized from the church board. Her stomach dropped. Mrs. Callan? Albert's voice carried across the frozen ground. We need to talk. Willa set down the buckets. I have nothing to say to you. Perhaps not, but we have plenty to say to you. Martha stepped forward. This farce of a marriage, it needs to end. That's not your decision to make. It is when it's corrupting the moral fabric of our community. One of the men spoke up, Horace Green, owner of the feed store. We've consulted with legal counsel. The marriage can be annulled on grounds of fraud. Willa's heart hammered. There was no fraud. You married Seth Callan solely to escape a legal contract with Mr. Pugh. That constitutes fraud. Horace's voice was smug. We're prepared to file papers with the county court. The marriage will be dissolved and you'll be ordered to honor your original agreement with Mr. Pugh. That contract was paid off. Seth gave him every dollar he asked for. Under duress, Albert said, I was coerced into accepting payment by the threat of your hasty marriage. Makes the transaction invalid. Willa stared at him. You're lying. You took that money gladly. Prove it. Albert's smile was cold. It's your word against mine. And I'm a respected businessman. You're a woman of questionable character who's been living in sin with a widower. I'm his wife now, legally married. A marriage of convenience isn't a real marriage. Martha's voice dripped satisfaction. Everyone knows it. You don't share a bed, don't share a life. You're just a housekeeper with a ring. The words hit harder than they should have because they were true. Willa and Seth barely spoke most days. He slept in the workshop more often than not. They existed in the same space without really touching each other's lives. The marriage is legal, Willa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Legal doesn't mean legitimate. Horace pulled out a folded paper. We're filing tomorrow. By the end of the month, your marriage will be annulled and you'll be required to fulfill your contract with Mr. Pugh, or face criminal charges for fraud. Criminal charges? For what? Theft by deception, accepting room and board under false pretenses. Take your pick. Albert stepped closer. You're going to lose, Miss Hart, and when you do, you'll have nowhere to run. So you can either come with me now, willingly, or you can drag this out and make it worse for everyone, including those children you've been playing mother to. Willa's hands clenched. Don't bring them into this. They're already in it, thanks to you. Martha's voice was almost gentle now, which made it worse. You've disrupted that family enough. Time to do the right thing and leave. The right thing. Willa's voice shook with rage. You people wouldn't know the right thing if it hit you in the face. You've spent weeks making my life hell, making Seth's life hell, punishing his children for something they didn't do. And you call that righteous? We're protecting our community. You're protecting your egos, your need to feel superior to someone. Willa picked up the water buckets. File your papers. Do whatever you think you need to do, but I'm not leaving. Not because you tell me to. Not because Albert Pugh wants to save face. I'm staying until Seth tells me to go. She walked away before they could respond. Didn't run, even though she wanted to. Didn't let them see her shake until she was inside with the door closed. The bucket slipped from her hands. Water sloshed across the floor. Willa stood there, breathing hard, trying not to fall apart. That's how Seth found her 10 minutes later, standing in a puddle, staring at nothing. Willa, what happened? The words spilled out, the confrontation, the threats, the plan to annul the marriage and force her back to Albert Pugh. Seth's face went hard. They can't do that. They can try. And if they convince a judge that the marriage was fraudulent, Willa's voice cracked. Seth, what if they're right? What if this whole thing was a mistake? I brought you nothing but trouble. Your kids are suffering. Your reputation is destroyed. You lost all your savings. Maybe I should just... Don't. Seth crossed to her, grabbed her shoulders. Don't you dare finish that sentence. You're not leaving. I don't care what they file or who they convince or what lies they tell, but they're going to take this to court. That costs money you don't have, time you can't afford. Willa looked at him. I can't let you sacrifice any more for me. That's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. This is my life, my problem. I should be the one deciding that. You think this is just your problem? Seth's voice rose. You think them attacking you doesn't affect me? Doesn't affect my kids? We're a family now, Willa, for better or worse. Remember those vows? Those vows were a formality. We both know this marriage isn't real. Isn't it? Seth's grip tightened. We live together, eat together, raise my kids together. You wear my ring and I wear yours. What part of that isn't real? The part where you actually want me here. The part where this is more than just... Willa stopped. She was saying too much, revealing things she'd sworn to keep hidden. More than what? Seth's eyes searched hers. Say it. More than convenience. More than obligation. The words came out broken. I can't keep doing this, Seth. Can't keep pretending this doesn't matter when it's the only thing that does matter. I wake up every morning in that room alone and I tell myself it's enough. That having a place to stay and food to eat and a purpose is enough. But it's not. It's not enough and I hate myself for wanting more. Seth stared at her. What do you want? I want this to be real. I want to matter to you as more than just hired help with a marriage certificate. Willa pulled away. But that's not what this is. You made that clear from the start. So I need to stop wanting impossible things and just... Seth kissed her. Not the brief, obligatory kiss from the wedding. A real kiss. Deep and desperate and full of things neither of them had said. Willa froze, then melted, then kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seth rested his forehead against hers. You matter, he said roughly. You've mattered since the day you walked through that blizzard to make sure I hadn't frozen to death. Maybe before that. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman I married out of obligation and started being the woman I can't imagine living without. Willa's eyes burned. You don't mean that. I do. And I should have said it sooner. Should have told you that when I wake up in that workshop, the first thing I think about is whether you're okay, whether you slept all right, whether someone said something cruel at the store. Seth cupped her face. I think about you constantly. Wonder what you're doing, whether you're happy, whether you regret saying yes to this mess. I don't regret it. Good. Because I don't either. Seth's thumb brushed her cheek. I loved Rebecca. I'll always love Rebecca. But loving her doesn't mean I can't love you. Doesn't mean I haven't been falling for you every day since you fixed those porch steps and told me they'd hold because you made them hold. Willa laughed through tears. That's a terrible reason to fall for someone. Yeah, well, you're stuck with me anyway. Seth kissed her again, softer this time. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fight this. Together. We're going to prove to that judge and this town and everyone else that this marriage is real. That you're my wife in every way that matters. And then we're going to live our lives without giving a damn what any of them think. How are we going to prove it's real? By making it real. Seth stepped back, held out his hand. Move into my room, sleep where you belong. Stop hiding in that sewing room like you're a guest. Willa's heart hammered. Seth, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, just asking you to stop sleeping alone when you don't have to. His eyes were steady, honest. We're married. Let's act like it. Willa looked at his outstretched hand, at the ring that matched hers, at this man who'd given up his savings and his reputation and his peace to keep her safe. She took his hand. That night, for the first time since the wedding, Willa slept in Seth's bed. They lay on opposite sides at first, careful not to touch. But sometime in the dark hours before dawn, Seth's arm found its way around her waist, and Willa let herself curl into the warmth of him, into the impossible reality that maybe this could work after all. The next morning, they told the children. Mary was thrilled. Does this mean you're really married now? Like for real, real? We were always really married, Seth said. But yeah, for real, real. Jack was harder to read. He looked at Willa for a long moment, then at his father. You love her? He asked bluntly. Seth didn't hesitate. Yeah, I do. What about Mama? I loved your mama with everything I had. I still do. But love isn't a finite resource, Jack. Loving Willa doesn't mean I love your mother less. Just means my heart's bigger than I thought it was. Jack absorbed this. And you? He turned to Willa. You love him? Willa met the boy's eyes. This child who'd fought her every step of the way, who'd challenged her and tested her, and finally, grudgingly, accepted her. Yes, she said simply. I love him. And I love you and your sister. This family. It's everything I never knew I needed. Jack's throat worked. Mama would have liked you if she'd met you. She would have thought you were stubborn and bossy and too proud for your own good, but she would have liked you. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it. But Jack's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. The court hearing was set for the following Thursday. Seth hired a lawyer with money he borrowed from the one friend who'd stood by him through everything. Tom Morrison, whose mother ran the boarding house and who'd watched the whole mess unfold with disgust at his neighbors. They're wrong, Tom said, handing over the cash. And someone needs to tell them so. The lawyer was a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Fletcher, who'd come from the county seat. She listened to their story without judgment, took notes, asked pointed questions. "They're going to argue fraud," she said, "that the marriage was contracted solely to escape Mr. Pugh's claim. We need to prove it wasn't." "How?" Willa asked. "By showing the marriage has substance, that you're building a life together, not just sharing a roof." Caroline tapped her pen. "Do you share finances?" "We're working on it," Seth said. "Do you present as a couple in public?" "We haven't really, Willa started. "Then start. Between now and Thursday, I need you to be the most convincing married couple this town has ever seen. Shop together, eat together, show affection in public, make it impossible for anyone to argue this is anything but real." So they did. It felt strange at first. Seth taking Willa's hand when they walked to the store, Willa standing close to him while he talked to customers at the workshop. Small touches that spoke of intimacy, of connection, but strange became comfortable, and comfortable became natural. By the time Thursday arrived, Willa couldn't remember what it felt like to not have Seth's hand in hers. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like half of Ridgefield had shown up to watch the spectacle. Willa sat beside Seth and Caroline, trying not to let the staring get to her. Albert Pugh sat with his lawyer on the other side. Martha Peterson and her crowd filled the gallery, faces hungry for vindication. The judge was a gray-haired man named Hendricks, who looked tired before the proceedings even started. "This is a petition to annul a marriage on grounds of fraud," he said. "Mr. Pugh, your lawyer may present the case." Albert's lawyer stood, painted a picture of a scheming woman who'd manipulated her way into Seth Callan's life, who'd married him solely to escape a legal obligation, who'd never intended the marriage to be legitimate. "The evidence is clear," the lawyer concluded. "Mrs. Callan, if we can even call her that, entered into marriage under false pretenses. The union should be dissolved, and she should be required to honor her original contract with my client." Caroline Fletcher stood. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear, but not in the way opposing counsel suggests. My clients entered into marriage for multiple reasons, only one of which was Mr. Pugh's harassment. They're building a life together, raising children together. They're a family in every sense of the word." "Can you prove that?" Judge Hendricks asked. "I can, and I'd like to call my first witness, Jack Callan." A murmur went through the courtroom. Jack stood, looking young and scared but determined. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. "Jack," Caroline said gently, "how old are you?" 10. "And Miss Hart, Mrs. Callan, has been living in your home for how long?" "About 2 months." "In that time, how has she treated you?" Jack glanced at Willa. "Good. She treats me good." "Can you be more specific?" She doesn't let me get away with stuff. When I'm mean or angry, she calls me on it, but she also listens. And she fixed things around the house that were broken, and she makes sure we eat real meals instead of just whatever's easy." Jack's voice got stronger. "She cares. About me and Mary and Papa. She didn't have to, but she does. And your father, how does he treat Mrs. Callan?" "Like he loves her." The words came out sure. "He looks at her the way he used to look at Mama. Like she matters more than anything." Albert's lawyer objected. "The child is being coached." "I'm not being coached." Jack's voice rose. "I'm telling the truth. Miss Willa, Mama Willa, she's part of our family now, and Papa loves her. Anyone who's not blind can see it." Judge Hendricks raised a hand. "That's enough. The witness may step down." Caroline called Mary next. The little girl was nervous, but she answered every question with the blunt honesty of childhood. "Do you like Mrs. Callan?" Caroline asked. "I love her." "Why?" "Because she stayed. Everyone else left or died or forgot about us. But she stayed even when people were mean, even when it was hard." Mary looked at Willa with those blue eyes. "She's my Mama Willa, and that means something." Finally, Caroline called Seth. He walked to the stand, sworn in, and faced the courtroom with calm certainty. "Mr. Callan," Caroline said, "why did you marry Willa Hart?" "Because Albert Pugh was using a contract to control her, and I couldn't stand by and watch that happen." "So it was purely to help her?" Seth paused. "No, it was also selfish. I wanted her to stay. My house, It had been dying for 3 years, just existing without really living. Willa changed that. She brought life back, made my kids smile again, made me want to get up in the morning. His voice roughened. I married her to protect her, but I stayed married to her because I fell in love with her. When did you realize you loved her? I don't know exactly. Maybe when she walked through a blizzard to check on me. Maybe when she stood up to my son and refused to be intimidated. Maybe when she fixed the porch steps and told me they'd hold because she made them hold. Seth looked at Willa. It wasn't one moment. It was 100 small moments that added up to certainty. And now? Do you consider this a real marriage? It's the realest thing in my life. Albert's lawyer cross-examined, tried to find cracks in the story, but Seth didn't waver. Neither did the children. Then Caroline did something unexpected. She called Willa to the stand. Willa's legs shook as she walked up, was sworn in, sat down facing a room full of people who hated her. Mrs. Callan, Caroline said, tell us about the night you spent in Mr. Callan's workshop. Objection! Albert's lawyer jumped up. Relevance? I'm establishing the development of their relationship, Your Honor. Proceed? Willa swallowed hard. I went to check on him during a storm. We got snowed in, had to wait it out. What did you talk about that night? Everything. Nothing. I don't remember all of it. Willa's eyes found Seth's. I remember thinking that he was a good man, that he'd been dealt a terrible hand and was still trying to do right by his kids, that I wanted to help him carry some of that weight. When did you realize you loved him? The question hung in the air. Willa thought about lying, making it sound simple and clean. But these people had already decided she was a liar. She was done proving them right. I don't know if I can point to a single moment, she said, but I remember the first time he said thank you, for checking on him, for giving a damn. Nobody had thanked me for anything in years, and the way he said it, like it actually mattered, I think that's when I started to fall. And the marriage? Do you regret it? No, not for a second. Willa's voice was firm. I regret that it took Albert Pugh's manipulation to make it happen. I regret that this town has made my family suffer for my existence. But I don't regret marrying Seth Callan. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Albert's lawyer stood. Mrs. Callan, isn't it true that you answered a mail-order bride advertisement out of desperation? Yes. And that you were rejected by my client on the grounds that you misrepresented yourself? I didn't misrepresent anything. Your client rejected me because I wasn't pretty enough. There's a difference. A ripple went through the courtroom. Albert's face reddened. Isn't it true that you moved into Mr. Callan's home immediately after being rejected? Yes, because he offered me work. I took it. And seduced him into marriage? Objection! Caroline was on her feet. I didn't seduce anyone, Willa said before the judge could respond. I worked. I cleaned. I helped raise his children. And somewhere in all of that, we fell in love. That's not seduction. That's life. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but Willa didn't break. She answered every question with honest conviction. When she finally stepped down, she felt lighter. Judge Hendricks called a recess. Willa, Seth, and the children waited in the hallway while he deliberated. You did good, Seth said quietly. I told the truth. Same thing. An hour later, they were called back in. The courtroom was silent as Judge Hendricks reviewed his notes. I've heard compelling arguments from both sides, he said finally. Mr. Pugh's counsel makes a valid point about the timing and circumstances of the marriage. However, timing alone doesn't constitute fraud. People marry for many reasons. Love, money, protection, companionship. The law doesn't require love for a marriage to be valid. Only consent and intent to build a life together. He looked at Seth and Willa. Having heard testimony from you, your children, and observed your demeanor throughout these proceedings, I find that this marriage, regardless of its origins, is legitimate. You're building a family. That's evident in every word your children spoke, in the way you look at each other, in the sacrifices you've made. Albert stood. Your Honor, I'm not finished, Mr. Pugh. The judge's voice was sharp. I'm also troubled by your behavior. You rejected Mrs. Callan publicly, accepted payment to dissolve your contract, and now you're attempting to use the legal system to force her into marriage against her will. That's not justice. That's harassment. I have rights. You have exactly the rights the law provides. No more, no less. And the law does not entitle you to another person's life simply because you paid a fee to a marriage agency. Judge Hendricks gathered his papers. The petition for annulment is denied. The marriage between Seth Callan and Willa Callan is recognized as valid and binding. Mr. Pugh, you are ordered to cease all contact with Mrs. Callan. Any further harassment will result in legal consequences. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mary let out a whoop and threw her arms around Willa. Jack was grinning. Seth pulled Willa close and kissed her in front of everyone, and she kissed him back without caring who saw. Outside the courthouse, Martha Peterson and her crowd stood in stunned silence. Albert Pugh climbed onto his horse without a word and rode out of town. Nobody stopped him. Nobody cared. Tom Morrison was waiting with a handshake for Seth and a kind word for Willa. About time someone told those busybodies where to stick it. Walking home through the late afternoon cold, Seth pulled Willa close. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I got off a train 2 months ago with nothing, and now I have everything." "Everything's a strong word." "Is it?" "I have a home, a family, a husband who loves me." Willa looked up at him. "A husband I love back. That's more than I ever dreamed of having." Seth kissed her forehead. "We should probably do something to celebrate." "Like what?" "I don't know. Normal people probably have a party. Invite friends." "We don't have that many friends." "Fair point." Seth thought for a moment. "How about we just go home, have dinner with the kids, live our life like it's normal? Because it is normal. This is our normal now." And that's what they did. That night, after the children were in bed, Willa and Seth sat by the fire. The house was quiet, peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from weathering storms and coming out stronger. "I've been thinking," Seth said. "About?" "The ranch, the one I was saving for before everything." He looked at the flames. "I let that dream go when I paid off Pugh. Thought it was gone for good. But maybe it doesn't have to be. Seth, you can't afford, not right now, but someday. We could build it together, you and me and the kids." He turned to her. "Make it our dream instead of just mine." Willa's throat tightened. "You'd want that? To build something with me? I want to build everything with you. Ranch, family, life. All of it. That's going to take time. Money, we don't have." "Yeah, but we've got plenty of time, and we'll figure out the money." Seth pulled her closer. "We're good at figuring things out." Willa leaned into him, breathing in the smell of sawdust and soap and home. "You know what I learned through all of this?" she said quietly. "What?" "That sometimes the thing you think will destroy you is actually the thing that saves you. I thought getting rejected by Albert Pugh was the worst moment of my life. Turns out it was the best, because it brought me here. To you. Funny how that works." "Yeah, funny." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down. Somewhere in the house, Mary called out in her sleep and settled again. Outside, wind rattled the windows that Seth had fixed and Willa had cleaned. Everything was far from perfect. The town would probably gossip for months. Money would be tight. There would be hard days ahead, but they'd face them together. As husband and wife, as partners, as two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and built something worth keeping. The next morning, Will awoke in Seth's bed with sunlight streaming through the window and his arm around her waist. She lay still for a moment, savoring the warmth, the safety, the impossible reality that this was her life now. Seth stirred. "Morning." "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Better than okay." Willa turned to face him. "Best sleep I've had in years." "Good. Because you're stuck sleeping here from now on. No more hiding in the sewing room." "What are we going to do with that room?" Seth considered. "Mary could use it. She's getting too old to share with Jack. She'd like that, having her own space." "Yeah, and maybe," Seth paused, "maybe someday we'll need that room for something else." Willa's heart skipped. "Like what?" "Like another kid. If we wanted. If that's something—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain. "I'm not saying we have to. I'm just saying maybe someday." Willa kissed him, soft and slow and full of possibility. "Maybe someday," she agreed. They got up, made breakfast together while the children slept in. The movements were easy now, practiced. Seth handled the coffee while Willa made eggs. They moved around each other without collision, without awkwardness. This was marriage, Willa thought. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, just this, working together, building something ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Jack appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. His father and Willa working side by side. The easy intimacy between them. "You two look happy," he said. "We are," Seth replied. Jack nodded, sat down at the table. "Good. You deserve it, both of you." Mary followed soon after, climbing into Willa's lap while breakfast finished cooking. The girl chattered about her dreams, about what she wanted to do today, about whether they could make cookies later. "Sure," Willa said. "We can make cookies. Can we make extra for Papa to take to Mr. Morrison, to say thank you for helping?" "That's a good idea, sweetheart." They ate together, talked about nothing important, made plans for the day. It was so normal it almost hurt. This was what Willa had been searching for all along. Not romance or adventure, just belonging, being part of something bigger than herself. After breakfast, Seth went to the workshop. Jack followed to learn more carpentry. Mary helped Willa clean up, then they started on the cookies. While the first batch baked, filling the house with the smell of butter and sugar, Mary looked up at Willa. "Mama, Willa?" "Yes?" "Are you glad you came here, even though it was hard at first?" Willa thought about that train platform, about Albert Pugh's rejection, about standing alone with nothing and nowhere to go. "Yeah," she said, "I'm glad. All of it, the hard parts, the scary parts, the parts where I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. It brought me here, to this kitchen, to you and Jack and your father. So yeah, I'm glad." Mary hugged her tight. "I'm glad too." That afternoon, Willa took the cookies to Tom Morrison. He accepted them with genuine pleasure. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "After yesterday?" "Better than I expected. Feels like I can finally breathe." "Good. You've earned some peace." Tom glanced toward his mother's boarding house. "Fair warning, there's still people in this town who won't accept you, who'll hold grudges." "I know, but they don't matter as much as the people who do accept me." "That's a healthy way to look at it," Tom smiled. "For what it's worth, I think you and Seth are good together. You balance each other out." "You're one of the few who thinks so." "I'm one of the few who's paying attention." Tom took a cookie. "The rest are too busy being scandalized to notice what's actually happening. But I see it. You've made that family whole again. That's worth more than any reputation." Willa walked home thinking about his words. About reputation versus reality. About how easy it was to judge from the outside without understanding what was actually happening inside a life. She'd been judged her whole life. Too plain, too poor, too old, too desperate. And she'd let those judgments define her for too long. But not anymore. Now she was Willa Callan, wife, stepmother, woman who'd survived rejection and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Let them talk. Let them judge. She knew who she was, and more importantly, she knew who loved her. That was enough. Winter deepened, snow piled higher, but inside the Callan house, warmth spread like something alive. Seth taught Jack advanced carpentry. The boy had his father's hands, his natural understanding of wood and tools. They worked together in the workshop, and sometimes Willa would watch from the doorway, marveling at how far they'd all come. Mary thrived under attention. She drew pictures of their family, all four of them now together, and hung them around the house like decorations. Her reading improved. Her confidence grew. And Willa? Willa learned what it meant to be loved, not for what she could do or how she could help, just for existing, for being herself. Seth told her he loved her every day, sometimes with words, sometimes with actions. A hand on her back when she washed dishes, a kiss pressed to her temple while she mended. Small things that added up to certainty. And Willa told him back. Learn to say the words without fear. Learn that love wasn't something you earned through perfection, just something you built through showing up day after day, even when it was hard. One evening in late February, Seth came home with news. The Hendersons are selling their land, 20 acres just north of here. Willa looked up from her sewing. The ranch land you wanted? Yeah, it's going cheap because they need to move fast. Tom thinks he can loan me part of the cost if I can come up with the rest. Seth's eyes were bright. It's not exactly the dream I had before, smaller, more work, but it's possible. How much do you need? Seth named a figure. It was significant, but not impossible. We could do it, Willa said slowly. If we're careful, if we both work. You'd want that? To build a ranch with me? I'd want to build anything with you. Willa set down her sewing. But only if it's something we do together, not you sacrificing and me just existing. Real partners. Real partners, Seth agreed. Equal say in everything. They shook on it. Then Seth kissed her until she forgot why shaking hands had seemed appropriate. Spring came slowly. The snow melted in stages, revealing a world that had been hidden for months. Willa planted a garden. Mary helped, getting more dirt on herself than in the ground. But the seeds went in, potential buried in dark soil. Seth bought the land, signed papers that made him and Willa joint owners, started planning the ranch they'd build together. Jack turned 11. Willa baked him a cake, and the boy actually hugged her in front of everyone. Progress came in small moments. The town slowly, grudgingly accepted the Callens' marriage. Not everyone. Martha Peterson still crossed the street rather than walk past Willa. Others held on to their judgments like precious things. But enough people softened, enough recognized that this marriage, however it started, had become something real. And those who didn't? Willa learned to pity them. They were so busy protecting their version of righteousness that they missed out on grace, on growth, on the messy, beautiful reality of people changing and becoming better. Their loss. One night in early summer, Willa and Seth sat on the porch they'd rebuilt together. The air was warm, crickets sang, stars spread across the sky like spilled salt. You ever think about that day? Seth asked. When you got off the train? Sometimes. Feels like a lifetime ago. You were so angry, so hurt. Seth took her hand. I remember watching you stand there while Pugh walked away. And I remember thinking that someone should do something, should help. So you did. So I did. Best decision I ever made. Willa leaned against his shoulder. You know what scares me sometimes? What? How close I came to not knocking on your door, to just walking away, finding somewhere else, anywhere else. She shuddered. I almost missed this. All of this. But you didn't. You stayed. You fought. Seth kissed the top of her head. You chose this life. Chose us. Best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence. Inside they could hear Mary singing while she got ready for bed. Jack reading aloud to his sister. The sounds of a family, their family. You know what I learned? Willa said after a while. Tell me. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing in disguise. That rejection can be redirection. That hitting bottom means you finally have something solid to build on. She turned to look at Seth. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough. Wasn't pretty enough, young enough, worthy enough. And it took getting rejected by a man like Albert Pugh to realize the truth. Which is that I was looking for validation from people who couldn't see my worth. And once I stopped seeking their approval, once I just started living, I found people who saw me exactly as I was and loved me anyway. Seth's eyes were soft. You're pretty wise for someone who got off a train with nothing. I had something, just didn't know it yet. What? Strength, resilience, the ability to survive anything. Willa smiled. Turns out those are worth more than beauty or youth or any of the things I thought I needed. Turns out, Seth agreed. Later that night, lying in bed with Seth's arm around her and the sound of crickets drifting through the open window, Willa thought about how far she'd come. From that platform to this bed. From rejected to beloved. From alone to surrounded by family. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments she'd wanted to quit, to run, to give up on the impossible dream of belonging. But she'd stayed. She'd fought. And in fighting, she'd found something she'd been searching for all her life. Home. Not a place, not a building, but a feeling. The certainty that no matter what happened, she wasn't facing it alone. That she had people who would stand beside her, who would fight for her, who would love her on her worst days and her best. That was worth more than any ranch, any reputation, any amount of money. That was everything. As Willa drifted towards sleep, she heard Mary's voice from the other room, a sleepy question directed at Jack. Do you think Mama Rebecca would be happy? That Mama Willa is here? Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah, I think she would be. I think she'd be glad Papa found someone, that we found someone who stayed. Me too, Mary whispered. Willa's eyes burned with tears. Good tears. Grateful tears. She'd come to Ridgefield expecting one thing and found something completely different, better, more real than any fantasy she'd built in her head during those long train rides west. She'd found herself, her strength, her worth. And in the process, she'd found a family who saw her not as a replacement or a convenience, but as exactly who she was meant to be. Willa Callan. Wife, mother, survivor. Home. The journey from that train platform to this moment had been brutal, humiliating, painful in ways she still carried, but every single step had been worth it because it led her here, to this bed, this family, this life. And that was more than enough. It was everything.